Well, after 7.5 long years, we finally have done it. 3 million subscribers. What an incredible achievement. So much hard work has gone into getting this far, and no, get off this. I mean, 3,000 is still pretty good. It's not as big as 3 million, but it's pretty good. I mean, felt like just a couple days ago we were here with, no subscribers anyway. So, anyway, diving into it, thank you guys so much for helping us reach this momentous occasion. It feels like it has been a very long time since we last had a good milestone, and I'm super happy that we have continued to keep growing this channel even as activity has died down. And a good way I thought to commemorate it was going through literally every robot we have ever made, starting at the very beginning in July of 2018. I will give a fair warning though, when I say everything, I literally mean everything. So for all the good stuff that came later, we'll first have to go through stuff that looked like this. So, fair warning, it's going to be a bit of a rough start, but soon we're going to get through and see a bunch of cool stuff. So without further ado, we'll pull back the curtain and show off literally every single robot we have ever made. Have fun, get some popcorn, this will be a while. Of course, we begin with the robot that started it all, Silverstar V1. This was an incredibly simple robot. It was literally just a paper shell with some spikes on the outside, also made of paper. And of course, it could just go on top of a build-your-own base or a Minotaur, because the Minotaur actually could spin a little bit faster. It fought a couple times before the channel existed and maybe made 1 or 2 appearances on the actual channel. It was very unimpressive, of course, but for the time, it was a good little first step of getting into model making, and it paved the way for everything after it. This duck model was the very first replica I made, and of course was the second one. It did not have any actuation. It was literally kind of just a paper box with an angled front to look like duck's beak. I remember being really happy with this when I first made it. Looking back, of course, it's not the greatest replica in the world, but for the time, it definitely at least looked like duck, so it had that going for it. It appeared a couple times on the channel, but eventually we did end up making the new version that had at least some actuation. Not the worst looking model in the world. I certainly made worse during this time. This was the second custom creation, and this was a Lancelot, and very similar to Silverstar V1, it would just go on top of a Minotaur or just a regular base, and would kind of just be a sit and spin thwack, although of course it really is not going to do much with that. We did eventually make a slightly renovated version of this robot with an updated look at the little lance, and this one appeared a couple of times. I think most notably it was the 50 subscriber tournament. It really did not do a whole lot after that, because we did make a new version, but it didn't look too bad, I guess. This robot, I really don't know what you even say about this guy. It's literally just a box with some Lego flails on it, and I'm pretty sure those flails, on this original version at least, came from the Lego Minecraft End set back from really old when they were first making those. I don't think this thing had a win outside of maybe in the 50 subscriber tournament. Don't have any memory of what it might have done in the early stages of the channel. It was pretty bad. I legitimately have nothing to say about this. It is just a paper shell for a tombstone that was white, and it says Crimson. Probably was based off of Cobalt, if I had to imagine, just based on the name. But it's not Crimson. It's literally just a paper shell that went on top of a tombstone. Never appeared on the channel from my memory. It's just a paper shell that goes on top of a tombstone. We can probably move on to the next one. Before the Season 2 version, or Season 3 version of Byte Force came out actually from the Hexbug line, I had a little paper shell that would fit on top of a Witch Doctor V1, and you can kind of see the mock treads I put on there, and maybe I put a piece of paper on the spinner to make it look blue. Obviously, it's not the greatest replica in the world. For the time, I guess it was a decent kind of stand-in for Byte Force. I think I used popsicle sticks that were colored blue to act as those blue forks on Byte Force, but obviously this one never appeared on the channel. Petunia, this was the first robot made by Filming Buddy, and this one was actually known as probably the best robot in the early stages before the channel existed. I remember doing quite well, especially in our first tournament, where I believe it made the finals before losing to Bombshell. So overall, for the time, it definitely did not look too bad. The front on it looked pretty nice. Obviously, it looks way closer to Beta than it ever did Petunia, but it definitely was not the ugliest model. Those ugly ones are going to be coming up much more soon. This one was not too bad, though. This was a cup that I flipped over and put Gigabyte lettering on, and you can literally see how crumpled up the paper was on top of this thing. The one thing I remember about this one was that I got it lost for like 2 months underneath my couch and then randomly stumbled across it and was like, wow, I forgot I made this thing. I also remember I think its fights were so boring that it really did not stick around much. It looks kinda like Gigabyte. It really was not good, and thank goodness it's gone. V1 Reaper appeared in the first ever fight that we ever did, to my knowledge, against the robot that you'll be seeing next. It was very much just similar to Lancelot and Silverstar V1. It just went on top of a chassis and then it would just spin to be kind of like a bad full body spinner, I guess. This one had at least some fights, and I think it actually had a couple wins. I know it beat Metal Siege in this fight from the random fight montage. Other than that, I don't have too many memories of this one, but this was a pretty good filming buddy model, things considered. I think this robot of the old guard is probably the one that gets memed to the most, at least between me and my friends. Old Yeti was quite bad in terms of looks. In terms of functionality, it did lose its only fight on the channel, but I remember this one actually being not the worst thing in the world. I believe it made the semi-finals in that first tournament we ever did before the channel existed, and other than that, it's just a pretty ugly Minotaur mod. The forks did actually kind of help sometimes, though. Seizure V1, if you want to learn more about Seizure, I highly recommend watching that Builder Boys video on it that goes a bit more in-depth. This one was pretty much just kind of Lancelot without any lances on it, or anything really of note. The funny thing I remember with this was it was the first source of kind of possible controversy in the meaningless tournaments, where I thought it beat Petunia, and then the buddy obviously thought Petunia won, and then it ended up going to Petunia. That's literally the only thing I remember about this version of Seizure. This is probably one of the worst quote-unquote replicas. It says Byte Force Season 1. It was literally just white paneling that I would put on the armor for a beta with some low popsicle stick forks on the front that were kind of dyed blue. This one's pretty rough. There's no defending this one. I don't even remember if it was good or not. It probably maybe was decent because betas were really good for us back then, but that's all I gotta say. Thank God this one's gone. Nitrius V1. This one was honestly probably one of the nicer looking ones of the earlier guard, and this one did stick around for quite a while on the channel and had actually some fights occur, especially during the early kind of mid stages up until late 2019. The early version was kind of very much based on Carbide and inspired, and originally was supposed to be called Nitrous, but then when I accidentally miswrote it as Nitrius, the name Nitrius stuck as a mispronunciation. So that's kind of interesting lore about it, I guess. This was a Warrior Dragon model, and I guess for the time, it's not the worst looking replica of Warrior Dragon I could have done. The fun thing about this one, I remember, is I would take a Hexbug Nano and put it underneath the flipper to try to make it simulate that really rapid fire flipping that Warrior Clan would do, mainly in like the Hyper Shock and... Actually, not even the Hyper Shock fight. I think it was just the Nightmare fight where the flipper actually worked. Either way, it's not a good replica, but it's not the worst thing in the world, I guess. You may think, where's the robot? It's painted clear, idiot. Yeah, so Clear Victor, it was literally a clear box that went on top of a build your own base. So in other words, it's just a build your own base with some clear armor. I don't really know why we chose to make this. It was definitely just a filler robot, but eventually the newer version did have a cutout for the big weapon, the big build your own angled disc, so it kind of ended up leading into Cyclone, I guess, if you squint really hard. Bombshell, the greatest robot to ever grace this earth. This one was using the hammer mech of the build your own. It was just a cell to go on top of that build your own. Very clearly is not Bombshell. We'll just get that out of the way real quick since that's pretty obvious. It is... Bombshell wasn't even white. I don't even know why I didn't just color the whole thing green. Either way, it won our first ever tournament that we did, and I think it's funny looking back because I like Bombshell, but nothing to say about this one. The three amigos were a multi-bot with two big Hexbug Gladiators and then one small Nano, and you might think, wow, this is such a random robot. I'm sure there is absolutely no remaining parts of this robot to this day. Turns out there is. Tequila, which was the name of the smallest multibot of this team, has still remained on my shelf somehow. It has just persisted through the years. There's not much else to say about this multibot team. It was there for maybe one fight. Eldeminador was one of the first robots to ever appear on the channel, and it has remained unchanged for basically its entire run on the channel. I think for a good reason. It is kind of fun to have a robot this old still kicking. This was made roughly October 2018, and it has changed barely at all, with maybe just some extra plastic armor over the years. It's Eldeminador, it's been fun to have around, not much has changed with it, and I think that's for the best. It has Duck's beak on the top though, which was the second robot we made from earlier. Thunder was another one that kind of had meme status for a while because it appeared in only one fight for the longest time, so its career record on the channel was literally 1-0. Its one win was against Petunia in that random fight montage, and it was a witch doctor with a panel taped to the spinner to act as a flipper. It did not flip good, you could only flip very light paper models, and that was about it. I think it maybe had a match with Eldeminador before the channel where I tried to flip Tequila, and I don't think I succeeded. Either way, that's Thunder. Mako was another one of the old guard. I have no pictures of the original version, but it did run this drum for most of its career, so I guess that counts. There was the original really terrible version of the Build-Your-Own Bot drum that I think it used before then, and I don't remember what exactly happened with that version. It might have fought Stingray at some point, but I don't remember. But Mako's always been kind of a fun little drum to have on the channel, and overall, it's managed to have a pretty decent career with some good wins. Hashtag rights for Mako. Stingray was one of the other old guard bots, and this one originally was a hammer with the same shell back from around 2018, and it's been using this same shell for pretty much its entire career, which is relatively impressive honestly, because some robots kind of have to cycle through them through the damage and stuff, but this has been a relatively reliable beta frame, which is always fun to see. Nice to see Stingray kind of still kicking around after being an older model. That's pretty much all I gotta say about it. Here you are going to see a first ever fight between Armageddon and Dietor. Dietor, of course, was just a witch doctor originally, and it was relatively decent, appeared in the first fight. I think it won that fight against Eldeminador, can't remember though. And Armageddon was Armageddon, a hexbug spider with a pole on it. And this one had a very solid meme status, and this was from the Battle of the Builders we did in 2018. This is one of the few surviving fights we still have from that tournament with footage, so this is a perfect time for me to put it to use. That's basically what the gist of Armageddon is, at least. It kind of just runs around, and it's a fun little fodder bot. And then Dietor, of course, has made its appearance a couple times. Similar to the Three Amigos, the Four Horsemen were simply just shells made of paper that looked like the robots from the Four Horsemen, and they only appeared in the channel a handful of times, and by handful, I think literally only once or twice, and one of them was just getting beat up by Nitrius. This was somehow engaging content back in 2019, but it's the Four Horsemen. They're a bunch of Hexbug Nanos with paper on top of them. Real exciting there. Electric Boogaloo / Thwack Attack was a older guard robot, and simply put, it would just spin real fast with a build-your-own base and big wheels. This was before I ended up moving to a Tombstone, which unfortunately I don't actually think I remember to include in this, but oh well, that's just one casualty of the 320 robots I had to put in here. Electric Boogaloo is definitely a mainstay of the channel, and it still hangs around after all these years. In fact, I'm looking at it, it's right next to me right now, and it's still living a good life. This is the first robot I don't have any pictures of. It was Drop and Roll, and it was 2 Hexbug build-your-own bases with paper notes on top that said Drop and Roll. That's it. There's nothing else to say. The second surviving fight we have is of Scavenger versus Lockjaw. These two came around the same time back in 2018. Scavenger was called, I think we just called it Predator back then, but simply put, paper head on shell, what more could you ask for? And Lockjaw, simply put, it was just a witch doctor with some paper on it. These two were, I think they had a couple appearances. This Scavenger Predator maybe fought a couple times on the channel, and this was from, of course, the Battle of the Builders tournament that I mentioned earlier. I believe that Scavenger won this fight though, and he was being driven by Filming Buddy, so Scavenger has a win over Lockjaw from about almost 8 years ago. Dang, that feels weird to say this almost 8 years ago. I feel old. And we have Stinger. This Stinger was one of the nicer looking models, I guess, for this older age of robots. The fun part about it was because it used the hinged wedge, sometimes if it could get bots ramped up on that wedge, it could actually flip them over, which was a little fun thing, especially in the 300 subscriber tournament where we managed to get the win over Behemoth in the finale, doing something of that similar fashion. This was an older one, but definitely a very solid one that had its moments on the channel, which is always nice to see. Now we are getting to probably one of the worst things I have ever made. That little piece of paper on there, I believe that was supposed to be a Sub-Zero, and all I would do would just tape those things onto a build your own flipper thing, and that was supposed to be Sub-Zero. I'm surprised that no one stopped me from doing that. This is probably the worst model I've ever made. At least old Yeti kind of looked like Yeti. This has no connection to Sub-Zero at all besides the flipper. Poison Arrow was another one of the older replicas from 2018, and I think overall it's not the worst looking replica. I made some worse ones back then, but there's not much else really that I could do with it because it was just a Minotaur with some paper on it. Had some decent moments on the channel from my memory. I think at the 50 subscriber tournament it might have had a win or two, but other than that, not too much else to say about it. It is a Minotaur with paper on it. V1 Atomic Green was pretty simply just a build your own with some little paper on the front wedge and the top of it. This one actually had some pretty decent moments on the channel before it changed to the newer versions. I believe it made it to the semifinals in a couple of tournaments, and I remember it having a pretty decent win over Reaper in one of those. It was very basic, but it was quite fun to drive honestly for it being such a simple robot, and it was pretty quick and definitely gave some robots some problems. Abomination is probably one of the most well-known robots from Filming Buddy, and this older version was covered in toothpicks, and only once I think we accidentally almost stepped on it. And if we stepped on it more, we'd probably be in the hospital from it. But it was always a fun little tracked pusher. Of course, could not self-right, but you know, most of the robots back then could not self-right super easily. Always a fun robot, and I feel like it always put up a pretty decent showing on the channel in the tournaments that it was in. Fun robot to have around. The old version of Metal Siege was a Bronco with some paper taped on top of it with no flipper. The only way it could flip was if something managed to get on top of the tiny little Bronco flipper mechanism nub, and it did not do good at all. Its one fight was against Old Reaper, and it lost to Old Reaper, so that kind of gives a perspective on what exactly happened with this one. It was destroyed and replaced with something else pretty immediately after it lost this fight. Stratospheric. Everyone loves Stratospheric. It was I believe originally meant to just be a model of a flipper design, but then I decided to cut out part of it to fit a fire ant in so it could drive around, and that is basically how it came to be. It had a newer version that was slightly better, but in the end, it was just kind of made to be cannon fodder, yet somehow it still managed to win a fight one time. Stratospheric, thank you for existing, but you really don't need to. Here is another one of those replicas that is quite torturous and horrible to the eyes. This was a earlier version, kind of a pizza time pretty much, where I put Scorpios' front plate on top of a build your own flipper mech that had accidentally broken, and I just put an arm on top to kind of look like Scorpios' saw arm. It's not exactly a good replica, but for the time, it seems kind of innovative as there wasn't really any true grabbers in the Hexbug line, really. No memories of how this fought or what it may have done. Next up, we have another robot that there is zero picture for, and that was an early version of Ultimo Destructo that went on a tombstone from my memory. I remember folding pieces of paper to stick out to extend and put some Lego wheels on there, but I don't remember for sure because that was almost 8 years ago, and I don't have any surviving pictures. There was truly only one image that could properly relay free shipping, and it was this from my paper model video. Free shipping did have a gap in the bottom where you could fit in a build your own or Minotaur chassis for it to drive around. The weapon of course did not work and they were quite flimsy, so they really did not do much of anything, but it was kind of fun. It got maybe a couple wins and the wheels would fall off, which was kind of fun back then, but there is not much else to add to this one. We have finally reached the robots that were made during the channel's existence. The second ever video I ever made was featured Endgame. And this one I always kind of look on fondly because Jack Barker commented on this video of me showing the Off the Endgame in like less than a day after I posted it. And I had basically no subscribers back then, so I have no idea how the heck he saw it so quickly, but I always look back on it fondly for this reason. It wasn't the greatest model in the world, but for back then, I could have done a lot worse. Next, we get to the second version of Silver Star, which, first of all, no silver, 0 out of 10. Second of all, 0 spinner teeth, which was definitely a decision on my part. It was I believe, an Utz pretzel container lid with paper around the outside on top of a tombstone base, and I feel like I remember using part of a fidget spinner to mount it to the spinning tombstone little rotating pulley thing. It didn't last very long because I decided afterwards to put a Shredderator shell on it and make it a Captain Shredderator. This was the first of several Shredderators I made. Don't remember exactly how good it was. I think it had a couple fights, maybe against Blindside and other opponents, but it very much was not the greatest thing in the world, especially because it did not have very good teeth. And I think the one time I did try to make it teeth, I just tried to put some paper on it and prayed for the best. It doesn't look too bad, but there is not really much to add on to this. It existed. Cyclone is definitely a legend of the channel, and it came around this time with me simply just trying to put some coins on top of a spinner. I believe I saw a YouTube video of someone doing it to a tombstone, and I thought of trying it to one of the Build Your Own spinners, and it definitely helped create the first real powerful robot on the channel, and Cyclone has remained a mainstay for that time being all across the years of the channel. Even then, it has like no tournament wins in Robot Chaos besides Season 1. And in order to showcase off the power of this version of Cyclone, that is why the Infestation was made. It was a fire ant and a gladiator robot thing, and they were just made to get tossed around so we could show off how strong Cyclone was back then. They did not come back after this. They were pretty much just made to be cannon fodder, which is, I guess, kind of the equivalent to having radioactive in Robot Chaos, I guess. Now we are on to two very funny ones. First up, we have Saint's Tombstone. What is Saint's Tombstone? I remember making a paper shell for a tombstone with the Saints logo on top of it. I don't know why I did this. I don't know what my reasoning was. All I remember is that I did it at one point, and it never appeared on the channel, and there's no footage of it. Likewise, though, we also have Flexial Tombstone, which follows a very similar path. I put a picture of Phil Swift on the spinner for some reason, and I put the Flexial logo on the top of the tombstone. There's no surviving footage of this, and I don't know what on earth it may have thought. All I know is that it existed, and you'll just have to take my word on that. Version 2 of Reaper was of course using the Build Your Own tank once it did come out, and this is definitely the most popular version of Reaper and was the version that really saw its main rise and kind of slow decline in the channel history. And of course, it always rotated the heads. I believe it went through just a normal skull, it went to Papyrus, it went to this meme of a trumpet skeleton, it went to Skeletor, and then it just went to a funny picture of a skeleton again. Gotta love Reaper, fun channel mainstay, even if it did slowly deteriorate over the years. Spellbound is best well known for being the robot who lost to Stratospheric in in the 50 subscriber tournament, which is quite embarrassing. I don't even think I included the version of it that came shortly after this with the spinner, but I mean, I don't even know what that version did. I think it maybe won one fight and then it lost to like Seizure or something. But Spellbound, it's one of those just random one-hit wonders in the series history. Killer Crab is definitely a veteran of the channel, and this early version with the Build Your Own base is definitely the version that saw the most success. Of course, it did get its fun flag on top for Robot Chaos Season 3 and onward until it got the Tombstone remake, and it's definitely most known for that fun run where it made it all the way to the semifinals in Season 3. It didn't have too much success besides that, but that run does always kind of get engraved in my memory, especially that win over Ultimo where we kind of screwed Ultimo over. This is a model of Gruff. Is it a good model of Gruff? Definitely not, but it is a model of Gruff nonetheless. You can kind of make out the side things, which are meant to be those little side arms on Gruff, and we use some clear pieces of plastic down the middle to bridge the gap and make it kind of more sturdy. It has something that resembles the flamethrower stack at the back, and it's just covered in electrical tape. I think it was in one exhibition fight in this 50 subscriber tournament. Then we get to Blindside for robot number 51, just missing the big 50, and there's not much else to add on to Blindside that hasn't been shown in its appearances on the channel. It is probably the most popular robot we have. It is probably the most fun robot we have too. It is a fun, big old bar that has been here for almost every single tournament since its creation, and we would not have it any other way. Besides when we did upgrade it to the Tri-Bar, which I believe is in the late 100s. Next up, we have the first version of Business Tombstone, which only appeared in the Robot Chaos vs. the World tournament videos, I believe, and it was in the second fight, and I believe got tossed out rather quickly. And this was originally supposed to be Superintendent Chalmers' tombstone, but we had no time to create the head, so Filming Buddy left it at this. This is still the greatest tombstone mod to ever be created, and we will fight everyone on that. This was the first version of Ghost Raptor. Originally it did have the spinner, but then it got a little bit damaged from a fight with Blindside, so afterwards we added on the de-icer. And it ended up doing, I think it got maybe a win, maybe two. It did not do much. I believe in the pilot tournament for Robot Chaos, it beat the first version of Silver Star, which came back for it at that one time, but other than that, I don't have too many memories of this, outside of maybe it being in Robot Chaos Season 1. Storm Surge is a robot that I believe was named after a water slide at Cedar Point, because I went to Cedar Point the year before making this robot, and that was just something that kind of just remained in my mind. It got a win in a tournament that we ended up not filming, but used some of the fights from for random fight montages, and besides that, it has been kind of thought about to come back at multiple points. It's just one of those fun random robots from the early age that you kind of wonder if it'll come back at one point, but it never has. This was the first version of Mammoth that was simply just a tombstone that managed to win the pilot tournament for Robot Chaos, with some wins that I believe were actually kind of impressive, all things considered, considering it is obviously no working weapon and it's just a tombstone. It definitely was smaller in scale than how Mammoth would have been, which we replicated and were so rectified in the new version, but this one was not a terrible robot at the time and it wasn't the worst model in the world. Jab V1 was a pretty fun robot to have around, and I believe it did decently well in Robot Chaos Season 1. It was very simply just a pusher with a Witch Doctor, but it had decent drive power, and of course it had the thumbtack at the back, so it could do some minuscule damage to the overwhelming amount of paper robots that we had back then. Not much else to say about Jab. Jab's pretty fun, been around a couple times, and the newer version is definitely better. Now we get to everyone's absolute favorite robot, Snowblind, and this being Snowblind V1, the one made by Filming Buddy, winner of Robot Chaos Season 1, and has pretty much been a stalwart of the series, bouncing off since that Season 1 victory run. Most winningest robot on the channel. This version was probably one of the weaker ones, especially compared to the newer ones with the tread base that just had so much better pushing power, but this one still was a very difficult robot to deal with back then, and usually had to take a flip to beat it. This was the second version of Duck using a Minotaur. I do not remember the exact person who originally came up with the idea of making a duck, but I believe that someone else had made one with a Minotaur before, and I thought it was a good way to make a new version of that first duck that I had. Believe it appeared in a few tournaments, and I think it actually fought the Hexbug duck that came out for a spot in the Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3, and I'm pretty sure it lost, which, you know, kind of for the best. Enforcer has been a mainstay for the channel for a very long time, getting some very good tournament runs in there, making the finals in Robot Chaos Season 4, as well as a very high seed in Season 5 before losing to Amethyst. But it did have a thumbtack for most of its career, besides some of a little bit of a stint where I believe I used a blade from a pencil sharpener for it. It has not changed much throughout the years besides some coats of paint, but overall it's been a fun one to have around for being a simpler, build-your-own base bot. Alcoholic Stepfather, I believe, was only made for one video, which was the Blindside vs. the World tournament, and it was something I quickly threw together, I think before I got a haircut. It was a decent replica, I guess. The hammers did not work though, but it just kind of drove around and died. It was used using a tank base, and I'm struggling to think of things to say for this. It's a replica of Alcoholic Stepfather. It kind of paved the way for Flop, I guess. Next up, we have Buzzkill V1 and V2, which I've decided to lump together because I made them very much around the similar time frame. The first version did just use the build your own saw, but then afterwards I decided to put it on a tombstone instead because it was quite convenient to switch out the bar of the tombstone for the blade. And this was the version that hung around for a decent amount of time, mainly Robot Chaos Season 3, which I believe it made the tournament during that season, and both of them were quite fun, and eventually it did move on to a tank base after that. This second version of Seizure was made by Filming Buddy and used a custom blade very similar to how Ghost Raptor would have been had it not broken down, and this one did actually have a pretty good tournament run in the 250 subscriber tournament, making it all the way to the final before losing to Blindside. Spinner never had too much power, but it was always fun to see parts slowly fall off the spinner as fights went on, which was fun damage back in an era where it was kind of hard to have actual good damaging hex bugs. Oh boy, it is Dummy Thick Hydra. This was a shell that was put on top of Metal Siege, which now that I think about it, I didn't put the newer version of Metal Siege in here. Oh well, my mistake. Either way, it was probably around here anyway. Thick Hydra. It was very big, it got maybe a couple wins, and I think it's for the best that I forget I ever made this ever. It kinda looks like Hydra, it's just really big. Lancelot V2 was another robot made by Filming Buddy, and this was pretty simply a Witch Doctor V2 with the lance on top and some plates at the front to act as armor. I believe it hung around for a couple tournaments. It did not do anything too crazy, but it was a pretty decent drum spinner to have around, and it was a solid little filler bot for most of those tournaments. Tenderizer was using those train buffers at the front and that weird hammer thing that came from that expansion pack for the hammer set of the Build Your Own Bases. I remember having a good win against Blacksmith as seen in this picture in the 300 subs tournament, and then it kind of just hung around in Robot Chaos Season 3, eventually just losing. This one honestly probably doesn't even need to be on this list because there's really nothing special about it. We just kind of put some parts together and gave it a name. But it was kind of fun to have around, and it drove pretty fun. Behemoth V1 was the winner of Robot Chaos Season 2 and had very deep runs in tournaments, especially in the 300 subscribers tournament before it lost to Stinger, and of course in the aforementioned Robot Chaos Season 2. I believe this version was also the one that appeared in Season 3, and eventually we did end up replacing it with a bit of a more refurbished version that did not have exposed wheels, but this one was definitely a very high winning and very good percentage record during its time on the channel. From one flipper to another, next up we have the model of Ultimo Destructo, and this one, instead of using a tombstone, we moved to using a Bronco base, and this one was quite devastating. In Season 3, it was of course the #1 seed before dropping out to aforementioned Killer Crab from earlier in the list, even if it was kind of a controversial loss. This one was always fun, and I do remember putting some little extensions on the Bronco mechanism to get it to flip a bit higher than stock. Overall, it was a pretty fun robot, but did not stick around too long. This was Frostburn's shell, and this was a shell that I originally had ordered to put on top of a tombstone because I had seen someone else do it, and I thought it would be pretty fun. I believe it was at Orange Dose Overjuice's Megabyte where I first heard about the shell, and then afterwards I eventually put up the money to buy one before I had a printer, and this one was pretty fun to have around, although it definitely was a bit big for Arena at the time, and it was pretty hard for it to get wins when it could not spin up to full. When I think of Son of Chaos, the first thing that really comes to mind for me is how many times this robot was pretty much just put into the highlighted fights that we would put onto the Chaotic Robotics 2 channel. Hope some of y'all remember that, because that was a long time ago. But overall, this thing really was not the greatest in the world. It had just a little fake lifter to go on top of a Witch Doctor base, and the drive was never good because it was an older Witch Doctor base as well. It was cool to have to fit with the channel theme, but never did very good. I genuinely have no memory of when this robot fought. All I know is that it did exist, and it was Gold Digger from the classic era of BattleBots, a Tombstone mod with a back-swinging pickaxe. The problem is that because the Tombstone mod does not spin fast at all, I don't think it really would be effective in any way, shape, or form. it was fun to have around, but I don't really think anyone misses or thinks about this one that much. This was the third version of Silver Star, and this one more pertains to all the versions that used the build your own shell and the build your own full body spinner. This version used a thinking putty tin with some glued on Lego teeth, but the future versions of this one also were the fully 3D printed shells going back all the way up to Robot Madness. This really is the version that has been here for most of Silver Star's career up until the new one, and honestly, it's been through a lot of misery. When I was getting the list compiled for this video, I had completely forgotten that a Red Zone version existed that was just a pusher. I always thought it was always just the spinner, but I forgot that this version competed in Season 2, and I don't believe it did very much at all during that season. It was just a very simple pusher. The thing I remember most about it, honestly, is probably using it for testing some of the arena hazards when we upgraded the arena in early 2020 with these screws and a bit of an upgraded pit trap. This is Double Jeopardy, and this one was kind of fun to work on. I remember this one more fondly than most. I have more good memories working on this one back in late 2019, early 2020. The cannon did not really work that good. The idea was definitely there, but we're using without any 3D printing skill yet, it definitely was a hard mechanism to get right, despite my best efforts. Best memory of this thing was definitely beating Blindside in Season 2, because that was quite a large upset back then. While Cat King is not around at all anymore, this was definitely one of the biggest forces on the channel in the earlier days, winning the Carnage Cup version, winning the first Carnage Cup, and then being a pretty good, strong force in Season 3 and some future tournaments afterwards. Probably wish it came back at some point, but I did end up making new versions of Mad Catter several times, which kind of carried on this robot's legacy, even if I do honestly think this version was probably better than both of those Mad Catters were. This model of the Berg was pretty simple. It was just a Minotaur mod with some paper on it, but I do think this was one of my better looking mods for the time, back when BuggleBots was a bit more in a heyday. Of course, that show has long gone for different reasons that, I don't really know those reasons, but it was a fun show when it was around, and this was relatively a decent model. I believe this had a subpar showing in Robot Chaos Season 3, but was a fun Minotaur mod to have around, I guess. Next up, to complement Son of Chaos, of course we had to make Son of Carnage. This was actually made before Carnage even existed, and this was another 3D printed tombstone blade that we ordered with just a paper shell around it to kind of make it look nice. They believe this only fought in maybe the tag team tournament, don't remember if we did one or two of those tournaments, but I believe it was in that with a team with Chaos, and the thing I remember most fondly about it is this video of me testing the first version spinner. Going back to that, next up we have another bot that debuted in only the Carnage Cup, and that was Daedalus. Pretty simply, the robot also from BuggleBots like the Berg was, a tombstone mod with some yellow paper and a colored blade. This was one that I honestly considered bringing back a few times recently, but I ended up choosing some other options like Hive Smashin' and eventually Nitrous later on again. This one was pretty fun, decent replica, did not do a whole lot, but it was kind of fun to have around. This Apex mod I remember working on for quite a while and being very excited when the blade arrived, but honestly, I don't think that Apex did very much of anything in its time on the channel. I believe it was fully retired after Havoc eventually broke the spinner in half, and because it was before I had a printer, I didn't really have much other than just having to retire it. It went winless in Robot Chaos Season 3, and I don't even think it got any wins in the Carnage Cup. It actually might have 0 wins on the channel. That's pretty sad. Next, we have the version of Drop and Roll I actually have some pictures and footage of, and this had one fight, I believe, on the channel against Blindside, and Blindside kind of just punted them around for a couple minutes. They were both just fire ants with some different wheels attached. One of them was a little plow with some Lego wheels, the other one had Lego gears and a flail at the back. They were pretty much just made to be cannon fodder, but I'm sure the video of them getting punted around by Blindside got a couple views, so you know, worth it. This was a new version of Atomic Green using a Witch Doctor V2 base that was meant to be somewhat reminiscent to P1, and this one I remember also having a few interchangeable wedge options between this plow for horizontals, a setup just with forks for fighting more forky robots, and I believe I also tried to make a hammer version with a hammer that didn't fire or anything, which was probably a big waste of time, but this version I remember being somewhat decent in Robot Chaos Season 3, but I don't really think anyone misses it compared to the new version. This version of Snowblind was probably the one that it had during its period of getting the most wins on the channel. This version was there for, I believe, seasons 2 all the way up through Robot Madness, actually, until we eventually made the version that had the invertible drive. This one definitely was the most successful of all those because the newer ones did have their own fair share of issues. This was definitely Snowblind in its purest form though, and it got a ton of victories in this format, and definitely caused a lot of pain. The greatest robot in the history of the channel definitely goes to Flop. I remember trying to come up with the dumbest possible robot imaginable, and I thought about gluing some sticks to the sides of some build your own wheels and letting it flop around. Eventually, I decided to make it look like Alcoholic Stepfather because I remember I ended up making that version a long time ago in that Blindside video, and this is pretty much the form of Flop that everyone remembers, and it had a fun appearance in Season 3. This was a Hypershock mod that used pretty simply using a Witch Doctor, and this was one of my favorite mods back in the day because I thought it looked really good, and it definitely was one of my nicest looking mods for the time. This one I think is definitely best well known for having a very strong appearance in Robot Chaos Season 3, making it all the way to the championship before getting defeated by Reaper. Overall, was a pretty fun one to have around, but I believe the spinner did break after a while because the spinners were just quite weak on these Witch Doctors. From one BattleBot spinner to another, we have Extinguisher. This was a pretty simple Witch Doctor V1 mod. I remembered actually using whiteout on the wheels to get the nice white look. Did not do it on the sides for whatever reason, but you know, that's neither here nor there. I remember switching out the spinner for a hammer for the Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3, if I recall correctly, which honestly, I don't know why exactly I chose to do that, because I don't think I needed to, but Extinguisher, it was here, and then it went. I appear to have invented a knife-wielding tentacle. For reference, I never spun it up with the knife on it. That was just for a funny picture. I eventually replaced it with a cardboard one immediately after taking this picture. This was just a meme thing I made in the middle of 2020 because I thought it would be funny, and I thought that video of the knife-wielding tentacle was really funny. If this video gets 200 likes, I will bring back the knife-wielding tentacle. This is a robot that I legitimately have no memory of when it may have fought, and this is one of those ones that I really have a very bad memory of. But it is Nuts and Bolts V3, and it is very simply the closest to Nuts as any of the versions of Nuts and Bolts have been. It uses some Lego flails like the previous versions, and it has a paper ring around the outside. That's all I can say. I remember barely anything about this robot, and I don't think anyone remembers anything about it either. Havoc was definitely one of the big steps forward for powerful spinners back in the day. Just using a big one from, I believe, a Solar Rover car, just soldered on there, and this was my first experience soldering, and I only burned myself once when making this, so you know, that's not too bad. This one was very fun though, it had some very fun moments, and this definitely paved the way for a lot of the more powerful spinners that I ended up trying in the future. Complete Control was one of the first mods I made during the preparation for Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3. Using a beta and some nice little straws and some paper, I was able to make a relatively decent looking Complete Control. And this Complete Control is definitely most well known for making the championship in Robot Chaos Season 5 and then winning said championship after being winless for the first leg of its career. It was definitely a very fun run, and then of course it went back to going terrible after that season. And of course, it would not be Complete Control if there was not Ghost Raptor beside it. This was, of course, the main source of controversy from that Season 1 of BattleBots with the delivered gift. Not much else really to add compared to the previous version of Ghost Raptor. This one I did eventually get the spinner working on for Season 3, but I believe it went winless and it did quite terrible in that season, so I had really no motivations to ever wanting to bring this version of Ghost Raptor back. So going into some robots that actually fought in BattleBots Season 4, first up we have free shipping. This was the second free shipping I made, and I believe I made this from the chassis of Metal Siege, who I took apart so I could use it for Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3, but unfortunately this mechanism ended up breaking after this tournament, so that's why Metal Siege kind of just faded away afterwards because there was just no chassis to bring it back with. Texas Twister was pretty simply just a build your own spinner with some large wheels and some coloring. I believe I had this idea initially from Chicken Strip Robotics, who had made a Texas Twister in a very similar format, and this was kind of just my rendition of that for Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3. I don't know why exactly I chose to make Vanquish, but it was a fun little one to make using a build your own tank with no treads. I remember because the wheels cannot touch the ground when there is no treads on them, I wrapped a few layers of electrical tape around, and that was pretty much the drive for these things. This really was not very good, and I believe it really only had that one fight in Tournament 3 before I ended up disassembling it, but I do think I did a pretty good job making that front wedge. This Ribot model was part of a collaboration I did with Hummel Creations, where he designed up a disc and I ended up just making the Ribot for it to go on. This one had a few good moments in the career on a channel. I believe it got some victories in the Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3 video, and overall it was a fun little collaboration. Eventually I did end up making some renditions of it to improve it for future versions, and Ribot has honestly been on the channel in a lot of different forms. The best custom mod in Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3 was Winston Churchill, which was a entry for a season of BattleBots, I believe Season 5, that of course ended up not working out because of COVID, but this one was a first Matilda mod on the channel, I believe, using some paper, construction paper, and some pictures of Winston Churchill to make a very fun little spinner. Had some good moments, had some nice flips, but could not beat Bite Force. One of the other bots that was prepared just for Hexbug BattleBots Tournament 3 was Nelly the Ellibot, a mod using a build your own base and of course the hammer with some nice elephant aesthetics. I was not the first person to make one of these, and I believe I was beat to the punch by both Chicken Strip Robotics and Penguin Robotics, who each had their own versions. This one I think was just a one and done, losing to Whammo, I believe. Was kind of fun though, it didn't look too bad. It was alright. Speaking of Whammo, this was basically just a redone version of Apex. I believe it was literally the same Apex bar, just with some white paper on top of it to replicate Whammo, who was an entry for a season of BattleBots, and it was either rejected or it simply was just a season that ended up not happening. I really don't remember, but this one I think it got a win over Nelly like I mentioned before, and then eventually it lost afterwards, and this was the only appearance that it ever had. Around this time was when I ended up making the new version of Behemoth that had the enclosed wheels and a full new shell. I remember basing this off of one that was originally made by World of Woodrow, where I saw that he had done a flipper version with the enclosed shell, and I thought that would be a good thing to kind of make to improve my own model of Behemoth. And this one ended up having some very good showings, winning of course Season 4, and then having some deep runs in some other tournaments, including Robot Madness. I think both versions of Behemoth definitely saw a good amount of success. Here's a model of Cobalt, which was very heavily inspired off of the Orange Dose Overjuice Carbide mod that I saw. It was an entirely paper shell with some nice little aesthetics, and I believe I cut out some pieces from the Rivals packaging with the clear plastic to get some of the little decals on top. The spinner, I know, was given to me by Chicken Strip Robotics at one of the robot competitions that we were at, which was a little bit more realistic than the stock Tombstone blade, which was very much appreciated. To go alongside Swiss Virginia, we made Swiss Mini, a little tiny version of Swiss Virginia that used a Witch Doctor base, and this one was actually inverted for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why I did that, but what I do remember from this robot was that it had some very fun moments in the Hexbug showdown with Theo and Chicken Strip, where it would manage to escape out of the pit several times somehow, despite it having pretty much nothing remarkable about it. It was pretty fun. Next up in the line of plastic ant weight renditions, we have Floor Scraper. This was a robot made by Ty McNear that competed at the first several macro events that we had competed at, and it was always a fun robot to fight because it was just some very big ol' spinner that was quite fun to go against. The Hexbug version of this definitely did not have the most success from my memory, but it was overall pretty fun, and it was a decent little filler Tombstone mod to have around for a couple tournaments that it appeared in. We have now reached the first version of Ocean Man. This one was just a Lego spinner on some Lego supports. Eventually, it did end up getting moved up to using a bigger Aftershock style disc, and that is the version that definitely first saw its main big leaps towards being the biggest threat on the channel, but it did start from quite some smaller, humble beginnings with a much smaller disc, and I do have to give credit to JR Robotics for having the initial concept of a spinner mounted up on a bite force that led to this idea. Next up we had, using the chassis that was used for Winston Churchill, was Drunken Irishman, another mod using the Matilda, and this one was based on the Drunken Irishman plastic ant weight, which you will be seeing likely near the end of the video when we go through all of those robots. I don't remember what exact tournaments this bot was in. It might have been in the Ultimate Throwdown as well as one of the Robot Chaos seasons, but I don't remember for sure. It definitely doesn't ring too many bells with it, but it was a pretty nice replica. Next up we have Pain Train, and this was a mod, one of my earliest ones that did use my own 3D printer, and I used a custom 3D printed drum at the front that was close to the one that competed in the show. I don't think this one really did that good in any of the tournaments it was in, but overall I think it did end up looking really nice, and I remember having to scrounge around to find a good picture of the top decal to put on top of the robot. Pain Train never had the most success, but it was one of my favorite ones in Season 5. This is one of those robots that, honestly, looking back, if I had the choice of preventing myself from making it again, I probably would have. This was Stratospheric, and this was the robot that used the concept that Orange Dose Overjuice came up with using a blacksmith flipper as a way to power and make Brit flipper style robots by just turning the blacksmith around. This one appeared in Season 4 and really did not do much of anything, but it was kind of a fun robot to have, I guess. Wheelbarrow was the continuation of a concept that we had come up with at the very end of filming Robot Chaos Season 3, where we had cut out some paper wheels and put the build your own tank tread around the end of it, and we made a very fun little pusher thing out of a tank base, and we eventually molded that into its own Tombstone mod, very heavily based on PP3D. I don't remember much of what exactly this robot did, but it was a pretty fun little Tombstone mod, especially after I saw Orange Dose Overjuice making his PP3D model in a very similar way. Next up we have Frenchie. I legitimately have no memory of when exactly this robot had its fights, but it was a tiny version of La Flyette, which we had made around this time as well. Basically just a continuation of the Swiss Mini that I showcased a little bit earlier, maybe like 7 robots ago. Never appeared really on the channel in much of any capacity. It was just kind of a nice little Hexbug to continue on the trend of making them in some similar form as we were working on Plastic Ants. Next up we have Earthshaker, which was from King of Bots, and it was very much a rip-off, maybe not rip-off, but it was a version of Bronco that kind of looked like Bronco and was probably not as good as Bronco. It had one appearance in Robot Chaos Season 4, where it made it all the way to the tournament from my memory before it lost first round. Maybe it lost to Behemoth, can't remember exactly sure, but it was a one and done on the channel. One of the mods that I remember having a decent amount of fun with back in the early stages of 2021 was making Vlad the Impaler, and this was a Hexbug soccer bot with some forks attached on the front and a shell made up to look like Vlad the Impaler, of course. This one was overall pretty fun, and it had a pretty decent run, honestly, in Season 4, making it, I believe, all the way to the round of 8 or round of 16. I don't remember, but I remember getting kind of damaged, and that was pretty much the end of it. This was the debut for Red Zone V2, which is definitely the version that is most well known, with the big old bar on top, with a nice wedge on front as well. This one was definitely the biggest threat in Season 4 before Enforcer managed to take it out, and it was a very solid robot and definitely had a lot of good appearances on the channel, and I've thought about bringing it back several times, have not done it yet, but it is definitely a fun one that I would like to bring back sometime in the future in a new capacity. Bird Brain! Everyone loves Bird Brain. It was a Hammerbot which had a miraculous win in Season 4 over Havoc in the first episode, but besides that, it really did not do too much. It was just kind of a filler hammer, but it was fun, and it is Filming Buddy's favorite robot. As he quotes, "I like Bird Brain. Bird Brain is cool and funny." I cannot argue. Bird Brain is pretty cool, and yeah, I'd say it's pretty funny as well. Surgeon General 1 is one that I've always found kind of funny because I ended up making this robot twice, but changed nothing about it in both versions, so there isn't really a reason for me to end up putting them as separate entries. It was of course using a rotator, and one of the few kind of obvious rotator mods I feel like was out there because the rotator really does not lend itself to being made by a whole lot of things. It appeared in Season 4, and I think that's basically it. It might have been in Season 5, but I don't remember. Overall, it wasn't a bad looking model though. Now we have gotten to what I believe to be the start of the really good replicas on the channel, and that was this Mad Catter, which I made after it had its win over Fusion in Episode 1 of BattleBots Season 5. This one was a good mix of using some paper art as well as some 3D printing for the custom blade and the side armor, and I used the Bite Force weapon setup to put on the Witch Doctor base, and it made a very accurate model, and I think this is where a lot of people really started to like some of the models I was making. So following up on Mad Catter, literally the day after, I decided to make Bloodsport after they had a good showing at Scorpios in Episode 1, and it was pretty simply just a Bite Force with a 3D printed front with the wedges painted red, and a custom blade put on top of the motor uprighted firm upwards. And every time I've run into a member of the Bloodsport team, they have mentioned that they have still been trying to actually make something of this sort, even years after I made it, which has always been something kind of funny. This never did particularly good in tournaments, but it was very fun. This Rusty, of course, is out of date because the new one exists, but this one was relatively fun and a pretty decent model. The way how it worked on the inside was I just put a little gear on that peg that spins in the Build Your Own Tank that connected to the arm, so it could only go down once, but once it did actually go down, it would kind of make like a drill grinding sound. So for what it's worth, for being a version of Rusty, I feel like it was not the worst thing in the world. Didn't really compete much, but overall it was a fun little mod before the real one came a couple years later. This Stinger was probably one of my favorite of the older good models that I feel like I was making, using a Minotaur and by just attaching a wedge to the front spinner. I was able to make a pretty decent hinged wedge robot with some accurate wheels, and similar to the real Stinger, I feel like these wheels would often fall off. It didn't last too long, and honestly I kind of wish that I kept this one together because I thought it did look really nice, but this was definitely a pretty fun model back in the late stages of 2020. Claw Viper was another one that I made. It did not have any working weaponry, kind of similar to the previous Stinger bot, but it did look pretty nice. It really did not have too much competition and too many fights because I think in the end just having a robot that didn't have any weapons did kind of make me want to just make something that I actually could do something with. But overall, I think it definitely did look decently nice, and you know, I did kind of rectify my lack of Claw Viper with Ember much further down the line, but we're not even like halfway through the video to that point. The robot that I made before I got my adorable dog was Hijinks, and this was a tombstone with long pegs attached to the wheels, with the wheels attached to the end, and then a massive blade attached to the spinner pulley. It was very big, very out of scale big, but it was a fun little project that showed some of the cool stuff you could do when you really push the limits on what you can do with a tombstone. Definitely was not the greatest thing in the world, but it did have some fun wins. This Tracer definitely looked pretty good. Unfortunately, I remember this thing having a lot of problems. Particularly, the spinner pulley would often fall off, and it really was just not strong at all. So it did not last very long in my tournament field. But it was a pretty nice looking model, minus missing the lines on the top. And the team of Tracer did comment on that video of me showing it off, which was very nice to see. This was probably one of the simpler ones that I did when I got into the grind of making boss from Season 5, since all I really had to do was just remove the Bite Force mount, carve out a little bit of space, and print out a simple diamond cutter spinner, and that was basically Jackpot. Always enjoyed Jackpot in Season 5, especially doing good as a budget build, and overall I think this was a pretty solid model, although it did not last very long, and I don't think had any really large appearances in any of my tournaments. This Whiplash model has had quite an interesting history, as it originally was made as a commission which I sent over to the UK, and then eventually, once the actual Whiplash came out, it didn't serve much of a purpose, so it ended up being turned into Endgame by Orange Dose Overjuice, so it essentially became a mod for Whiplash by me to an Endgame mod by Orange Dose Overjuice. So this chassis has definitely had a pretty fun history, never competed really on my channel, of course, because it was a commission, but it was a pretty fun model to make. Gruff was another one that was pretty fun to handle. This was, of course, an updated version of the one I previously made, and similar kind of to how old Metal Siege was, it was just the forks attached onto the flipper mech, and it did pretty good in the Ultimate Throwdown, although the attachment of those forks up front definitely were kind of weak, and I feel like I recall them breaking at some point. But overall, this was a decent replica that ended up being pretty effective in combat. We get to yet another Seizure. This one was much more comparable kind of to the newer version than some of the older ones, but it was still using a Witch Doctor base, and this one competed in the Ultimate Throwdown. And from what I remember, it did quite well, getting a victory over Cyclone, but getting defeated by Blindside. Overall, this was definitely a decent version, but really did not expect it to do so badly in Robot Chaos Season 7. This Season 1 Lockjaw, looking back, it looks pretty nice, honestly. I think it did a decent job. I don't have fond memories of it, mainly just because whenever I think of it, I think of an absolutely atrocious fight it had in the Ultimate Throwdown against Tantrum, who we'll get to later. That, in my opinion, is one of the worst fights we have ever done, and I don't believe I even showed it on the channel. Overall, though, I think it is a decent-looking replica, although the forks really did not do much of anything because it was too heavy. Before the Sawblaze came out, this was the attempt at doing a hammer saw, and pretty simply, it was just the motor attached to a hinged arm, and when the spinner hit something, it would kind of bob up and down, and if it got a good pin, it could kind of spin and hit on the top. It is not really super effective, but I think the thought definitely was there, and it wasn't the worst looking model in the world. Definitely could have been a little bit better, but overall, it did make at least some fight appearances, even if it did bad in Season 5. This is probably one of the greatest creations from the Buddy. This is Abomination, the new version, which has, I believe, a cutout of the UK, random text, a Triceratop on the backs, a Vev Wedge with a plane, a battery on top, I believe a thumbtack, and I think just some random splotches and stuff. It is probably the most busy robot that we have, but it is probably the most fun in terms of aesthetics. Now we get to the Tantrum that I mentioned before. Overall, this one has a lot of views on my channel, honestly. Out of all the robots, because I used to post a video for every single new one that I made, this one for some reason got a lot of views. I'm not sure exactly why. I do think it was a relatively decent replica. It just needed those fists on the side, which I think I actually did eventually add, but it didn't do very good. Ultimate Throwdown, it was very boring, but it looked pretty nice at least. Now we get to the version of Ocean Man that definitely, I think, was the most fun, and that was the version with just the big ol' spinner motor on the back that just absolutely launched stuff into the stratosphere. This one had a mainstay through, I believe, the Ultimate Throwdown and then Robot Chaos Seasons 5 and 6, of course winning Season 6, but it did encounter a lot of issues and did have to go through a chassis swap because of the demand that motor put on it, but still, it was a very fun robot. This was a refurbished look at Stinger. This one was when it had a new 3D printed flipper arm, as well as the pod's little side armor on the side. The version around then had forks instead of the little fins that are on the present one, but I did not have a good picture of it, so I just took this one. This is the version of Stingray that has pretty much just been remaining. The color scheme has changed a little bit, but this has basically been how Stinger's been for the last 6 years. 13 Black, this one was originally based on World of Woodrow, who made a similar 13 Black mod by taking the Build Your Own angled disc and putting one on the front and one on the back and attaching them both with a pulley, and I decided to do the exact same thing for this one. I remember, and still have actually, the discs I painted for these because in my opinion I think they look really nice. This one only was there for one season, but it did get a win in Season 5, and overall I think the discs look nice. Shockwave, one of the fun robots in terms of channel lore. This one overall was quite good in Season 5, getting a tournament spot, and then of course there was that controversial loss to Red Zone that led to the Shockwave suing me memes and the memes of who won, Red Zone or Shockwave, which was always fun. But then eventually Shockwave got killed, and eventually it is now in the form as Quantum, so at least this chassis is still getting put to pretty good use today. A robot that really did not last too long, but still was a pretty fun one, was Gabriel. This was using a thwack arm that I believe was designed by Chef Boy Arby. That may be incorrect, but I believe that's who it was on Thingiverse who designed it. And pretty simply put, it is just a model of Gabriel. It thwacks, it does kind of funny stuff. If I did go back and remake it, I probably would change to TPU wheels, which are a bit more shock resistant, but, you know, I'm not remaking this anytime soon anyway. This one is a very kind of a stand-in for Mako in Season 5. This is Wolverine. The original Wolverine was on the channel Random Raz CK, and this was kind of my take on it, and it's relatively straightforward. It is just a recolored build drone with the drum, and I don't recall it doing particularly well in any of the tournaments it was in, but it was fun, and it was here, and I'm sure maybe it had at least 1 or 2 good fights along the way. Next, we have a robot, and I legitimately do not have any memory of any fights this thing has been in. This was Gamma 9, which was just a Minotaur base with some coloring, and I can tell just from this, the purple Minotaur chassis in there, this was definitely after I took apart the Lockjaw mod. And I can already remember, the thing I do remember at this is the forks would always break off because they were just glued onto tape, and the bonding surface was always quite bad. This is one of the funny ones. This is George, and you may wonder, what the heck is George? Who is this? It was a beater bar attempt I did, kind of inspired off of Lynx for a Bite Force using a beefy motor, but it was really not strong at all, so I scrapped it. But pictures kind of ended up resurfacing, and eventually I thought of it, and I was like, wow, I never gave this thing a name. Maybe I should just call it George. Here is said interaction with it eventually being named George. Next up, we have a model of Death Roll, and this one, I remember the spinner being very, very underpowered, and of course it did not have the self-running arm, but it was running off of a Witch Doctor V2, which did not have any support for that. It really, I think, did quite bad in Season 5 that it was in, getting stuck on the old arena spikes, and I think just getting KO'd relatively quickly. It looked pretty nice, the Crockhead looked pretty alright, but it really was not that great in terms of combat or anything. But it looks nice. Getting into a Bugglebots replica, we have Hello There, the pink Hammerbot with some very nice big eyes. Did relatively decently in Season 5 from my memory. I don't remember if it made the postseason or not, but I remember having pretty fond memories of fighting with this one. And even though it did not stick around for too long, I do think this was a pretty nice replica that used very little 3D printing, as it was mostly just paper cardboard work with some pennies glued to the wheel, with some pennies to represent the wheels. Oh boy, we have Amethyst. I love Amethyst and Bashbots. I love their robot Bashbots. This replica was probably the worst robot ever in terms of driving. The drive was so painful, and it was just an absolute slog to get through its fights. And despite that, it still made the tournament as the 14 seed in Season 5 and beat the number 3 seed Enforcer, mostly off of Enforcer's own accord driving into the pit. Amethyst, super happy it exists. And then next we have Hela, which was kind of the predecessor to the Loki mod, once again from Alex the Hunted. This one was a fun one to work on, but because there was no easy way to make the actuation for the arm, it was just static, so it really did not do a whole lot in combat, and I think I messed up by painting the wheels on this with a kind of glossy green, which ended up removing all traction, so it kind of quickly faded away right after that. This robot does still exist, but I do not have it with me anymore, and this was my mod of Tornado, and this was the true final option for that chassis that was once Lockjaw and then became Gamma 9. The spinner was not super powerful, but it did spin, and it was overall, I think this was a very nice Tornado replica. It was always pretty decent at push, didn't really have good ground game, and it never was the greatest in competition, but it always put on a pretty good showing, and I do remember being quite decent, especially in Season 7. Next up, we have Topbot from Two Penny Milk, and this is probably it's quite an old robot, honestly, and it really has not changed much at all at this point. Something that I do always remember with this one, though, is that I ended up cutting my finger really badly when working on this robot, and I have a permanent scar on my finger because of it. So whenever I just feel my finger and I feel like a little cut of notch, I'm like, oh yeah, I got that when I was working on Topbot. That's the best thing I remember with Topbot. Always been a fun bot on the channel, though. Next up, we got another Robot Wars rep, and this is Nuts 2. And finally, we have something that actually remains around. It is still around to this day. It's just in quite a couple pieces, a little bit damaged. But overall, I went for the Season 9 design because Orange Juice Overjuice had already made the Season 10 version, and also he also made the Season 8 version. So yeah, this was just the one no one did, and I mean, the only memory of it in Season 9 was it getting chucked by Matilda, so it was It's another Captain Shredderator. This one is a tombstone base, similar to the last one, but it is an entirely new shell with a bit of also some clear plastic on the top, so I think it's worthy of its own entry. I don't remember what fights this one had. All I remember is that I did indeed make it, but because it still was a tombstone, it was a bit large and out of scale, so it never really had a permanent spot in any of my lineups for any tournaments or anything. Deadlift, in an era where I felt like I was very much heavily leaning on 3D printing for a lot, this one had nothing in terms of 3D printing, so it was kind of fun, and overall I think it is a relatively good model for the Season 5 or 6 version of Deadlift. I think it's one of those ones. But I think overall it was a pretty decent replica. The front wedges were decently low, not the lowest in the world, but they did definitely put on some pretty good showings, and in Season 6, it overall was a very solid machine, even if it didn't get the most amount of wins. Next up, we have another Scorpios of the many Scorpioses I have made. This one was very similar to, honestly, the final one, which will be near the end, but this one was an entirely paper front because I was not at the point I felt comfortable with making a 3D printed scoop for it yet, so this was a pretty reasonable alternative. The one thing I remember being an issue with this one was it would wheelie a lot, but overall, it looks like Scorpios. Didn't really fight much on the channel, and I think I probably turned this into Kraken after this or something, but overall it looks pretty decent. We have the follow-up to Ribot. This one, I can already tell that the head was a little bit oversized, but other than that, it very clearly is the undercutter version of Ribot from Season 5, with some bit more better detailing on the wheels and a different design spinner than the previous one to match one that was a bit closer to what they were running in that season. All I remember from this one was that Ocean Man kind of trashed it a little bit, and that's basically all I remember from it, but I do believe it wasn't a season. This was a replica robot from that Builder Boy bot of Italy. Originally, I remember this one using some ferryweight wheels that I had ordered from Bristol Bot Builders, and then eventually I switched to my own 3D printed ones when I need them. This one, though, had quite a decent run in some of its tournaments. It stuck around for quite a while. The one issue with it, the bane of its existence, was the Bite Force chassis that inhabited both Endgame, Ice Wave, and then eventually, actually, he never fought that seizure, but one chassis gave this thing a lot of issues. This was the refurbished version of Complete Control I made after it had its victory in the Season 5 of Robot Chaos, and this one definitely looked a lot nicer than the previous one. The success was very middling with this one, and it really was not able to reach the highs that the previous version had in Season 5, but overall I think it definitely did look nicer. Unfortunately, it is no longer around, but I did very much like this version. Maybe it'll come back at some point. I don't know. This was a refurbished version of Hijinks. In this one, I did end up sacrificing the easier invertibility with making the head that sticks out a little bit so it was a little bit more accurate and doing a little bit of a refurbished paint job. I think this one was just in Season 6, but I don't remember it doing much at all in Season 6, honestly. Overall, it still was very oversized, and I believe that bar was like 7 inches in diameter, so it was quite massive still. The glorious robot of Hammer of God, going alongside the plastic ant Hammer of God that I made around the same time. The one thing that I think I remember, and probably what most people would immediately think of with this robot, was the hilarious win it had over Complete Control in Season 6, where Complete Control's motor got fried, and then it just kind of hammered away and won the fight. Did not do much besides that, but I will always remember it for being in the Welcome to the Chaos trailer video I made of it beating Complete Control. Now panning literally right next to that original image, we have the new version of free shipping, the third one. This one has a redone flipper mechanism, all 3D printed this time, and not connected to the actual flipper mechanism to help prevent it from breaking again like it did in the previous one. This one was only in Season 6 from my memory, and those forks did break quite a couple times, which did cause some issues, since in the end those definitely are quite fragile, and really any spinner was eventually going to take those off, but it was still fun. This was a very ambitious mod at the time. This was a combination of using a Witch Doctor base with a kind of Frankenstein build your own bot mechanism so that you could put the flipper on it. You can even tell the flipper gear for the build your own mechanism is kind of cutting out from the middle of the flipper panel. But overall, it did actually work. The flipper power was very weak and it could not self-right, but this was a very fun mod at the time. And Blip is one that still remains with Duckbots to this day, and you'll see some later versions of this bot soon. The one thing that comes to mind with this one is this robot's intense love affair with the pit. This robot has probably had more unfortunate losses to driving in the pit than any other on the channel, but Kraken always put on some really fun fights. It was a relatively simple saw blaze mod with just the arm attached on to the mechanism for the hammer saw and just a big ol' head printed with some good detailing. This one is no longer around, but I feel like this was one of the most entertaining robots when it competed in Season 6 and 7. Don't say it. We have Orby Blade next. This one was, I believe, only in Season 6, and eventually this chassis probably went on to be used by Hive Smashin', but this one was quite fun. It did have, the thing I think I remember most about it was when Blindside kind of destroyed off the front wedge and then just took advantage of it. But overall, this one was still a pretty fun model, and I did think it looked pretty decent. And I have seen some other people using these parts to this day with their own Orby Blade mods. I don't remember where I posted them, honestly, but it's fun to see people still using them. We have Lolo Man. He is low, and he is a man. This was, of course, from Robert Cowan. Basically just a moving plank, and this one was pretty boring, honestly, but it did have a very good run in Season 6, where it made it all the way to the semifinals before losing a game of hide-and-seek to Snowblind to get eliminated. Poor Blindside running into this thing, the one thing Blindside really could do nothing against. This thing's always been pretty boring, but it's always been very effective. A definite sleeper hit robot of Robot Chaos Season 7 was Rampage, being the robot to finally take down Loki, and then, of course, it ended up doing terrible in Robot Madness, but that's neither here nor there. This was a pretty simple mod using a Witch Doctor V1, and it really just lended itself perfectly, especially with the design of Season 6 Rampage. Definitely a simple mod, and one that was quite fun, and was very easy to drive around. Not too much to say about this one in terms of the design perspective. It was just always fun to use, though. A replica of a robot from Team Penguin Robotics. It's Spirit of Taiwan, which was originally a stealth flipper, but because I didn't have the technology or stuff with a what base was this? Tombstone. I didn't have the stuff with a Tombstone base to make that work, so it was just a hinged wedge, and it didn't really do much of anything in Season 6. I think it got one win over Nuts, but it was a pretty decent replica, so it was here, it did some stuff, and then it quickly left for other robots to come through. Ramplan was a very fun one as well. This one, I remember I made the front wedge and the stick using pieces of Hot Wheels track because I wanted to see if it would be good at absorbing different shots. It was neither here nor there, and the paint definitely did not like sticking to it, but it was a pretty fun replica, and this one's definitely best known for being able to take Ocean Man to the limit in Season 6 and then taking down Snowblind. While it did not have the most success in deep tournament runs, it definitely had some big wins. This was the follow-up to the first Hypershock, using a new technique of mine at the time, which was using different wheels on different chassis. So these were the Witch Doctor V1 wheels put on the Witch Doctor V2, which led to the wheels being a bit bigger and more accurate, which led to, I'd say, a better overall replica. This one was more focused on the Season 4 design, I would say, than the previous one, which I think was a bit closer to Season 3. This one did not do too much, but it did make the playoffs in Season 6, so at least it had some success. This model is actually still around, but very damaged and very much in pieces. Originally I had this Smee without the spinners, but then I realized I probably could do that by just repurposing the drive motors that I was not using, and it did work briefly, but the problem is that at that point it was just too much weight on these little robots, and it was just incapable of running with any real speed or anything at that time. So while it did not really work that good, it was a pretty ambitious idea, and overall I'm still happy I attempted it. this Sub-Zero is at least 50,000 times better than the one I showed at the very start of this video. Of course, it did not have the functioning flipper because I did just attach it to a Whiplash base arm. It was very fun, and overall I think this was quite an accurate mod. It had 0 wins in Season 6 that it competed, which was a bit unfortunate because I did think it looked quite decent, but I mean, Sub-Zero not getting any wins in seasons is unfortunately kind of par for the course for it. Outside of Season 5 though, it was pretty good in Season 5. Next we have Retrograde, and this one was overall kind of hit and miss. The Forks grabber at the front was not very powerful because it was just running off of the hammer saw of the saw blaze. The back spinner also did not do too much. Main thing I remember of this one was it getting absolutely shredded by Ocean Man in Season 6, but it did end up making the bracket from what I remember, getting a win over Cyclone in a win and in fight, and it quickly lost after that, but overall not a bad robot. We have the follow-up to my previous version of Endgame, and I still think this is honestly a very good Endgame replica. It is no longer around, of course, because this chassis is now part of Seizure, and then of course before it was Ice Wave after that, but this one did make it all the way to the semi-finals in Robot Chaos Season 6 before it ran into Ocean Man, and it definitely put up some decent fights outside of the fight where it lost to Nuts. Besides that though, it was pretty decent. Around this time was when I addressed every single comment of people saying that Blindside flipped over too easily, and that is from watching Bloodsport's tri-bar spinner and realizing, oh, apparently that makes it more stable. And as soon as I switched to this thing basically never flipped. I don't think there has been a single time where it has flipped like the old one has, outside of a few moments where something very specific happened. This is the version of Blindside that I think is the absolute best version and definitely seen the most success. This robot really did not last too long, but I do think this was quite a nice uppercut replica. Of course, it uses a saw blaze at the back with a pulley attached to the weapon motor to drive the big spinner up front. A power was quite middling on it, and honestly, knowing some of the stuff I know now, I think I know how exactly I would be able to get a bit more power out of this thing, but I did like how it did kind of do what Real Uppercut did, where it could kind of hinge back on the back forks to act as kind of like some weird invertibility similar to what Monsoon has. It was a pretty fun model. Mad Catter was one that definitely was worth of an update because it was what I consider to be the first of my really high-end models. This one, I did end up putting on a really strong spinner for it, but because of the positioning on the Witch Doctor base, the spinner was a bit smaller than it probably could have been, so it wasn't the greatest model in the world, but it did have quite a good amount of power for it being such a small spinner, and overall, it was a decent little improvement to the previous Mad Catter I had made. This robot, I genuinely have no idea what fights it might have had. This was probably taken from Hijinks, I would have assumed. It was Boogeyman, the failed entry into one of the previous seasons of BattleBots, an overhead spinner with some low forks at the front. Did not have any fights of my memory, and I can definitely tell from the spinner it definitely was not very strong, but overall I think it was a pretty decent replica for a robot that never really came to see the light of day. The greatest robot of all time, unbiased, it's Bung. This one has some pretty funny origins that I really do not know the full extent of, but I know it originated especially on the video game side. I think from Porygon is the correct name, but correct me if I'm wrong. This thing had some pretty fun moments, especially in the Bung Gauntlet where it got some pretty crazy wins. I think it went 3-1 against some high-level bots, and overall, how can you dislike Bung? It's awesome. Mammoth was a very ambitious project because it was a Frankenstein of a Witch Doctor battery pack with a Minotaur board with a Fingertech Silver Spark weapon motor and N20 drive, and overall it worked incredibly well. It didn't get super deep in the tournaments it was in, but it definitely worked quite well, and the arm got some very nice pickups, honestly. I really hope to bring this one back in the future because I still have all the parts, I just have to fix the electronics. P1 really did not hang around for too long because that big old gear right in the middle of the travel of where the flipper would be is kind of an eyesore in my opinion, but other than that I think it was overall a pretty nice looking replica. I do wish that there was a way for me to rectify that, and I do know probably how I would have done it if I retried it in the future, similar to how I did Standalone and Run For It, which you'll see later on in the video. But this one was not a bad replica, and the flipper did work, all things considered. This is definitely a better replica of Yeti than the one at the beginning of the video. This one was based on the Season 4 design, and I did just glue on some little bits and bobs at the top to try to replicate what was the fork and top armor bits. I did end up changing it out because it was making it hard to drive upside down. This one, unfortunately, really did not appear much because the drum was just not super powerful, but it was overall a pretty nice replica of Yeti, and I believe it was World of Woodrow who made something similar before me. Ice Wave. This one is very much synonymous with the horrid problems it had in Season 7, yet despite that, still making it all the way to the semi-final round after Blip choked against it. This one was very fun, and honestly, the blade sounded really cool when it was spinning up, but when I look back at it, I think on the goofiness of it, but it was overall a pretty nice replica, and I did recreate those forks that it had for the Season 7 run. In terms of the modern robots of the channel, I think Atomic Green might be the best. It has been so incredibly successful in all tournaments that it has been since that point, and it really has just been an absolute workhorse with the front lifting wedge and the back plow in the rear. It has had some close calls and it's had some losses, but winning Season 7 and having a really good performance, all things considered, in Robot Madness, and then of course in Season 8 making the finals before losing to the other Metal Siege, it's always had a big run. This was a version of Flop that I believe lasted one day. I made it as a joke because I thought, oh, why don't I make a new version of Flop? But then I realized using a duck base to make Flop is really, really stupid because duck bases can do a lot more interesting things than Flop did, and you can tell that this was actually made from Shockwave before I ended up turning it into Quantum. So this one existed for a while, and honestly, I don't know why I did it. For this new version of Ribot, I decided to go with the Vert instead of the Undercutter, since the Undercutters kind of had middling success. This one was using the Hypershock base, since Hypershock, of course, was eventually made into its own robot. And this one, you can see the same bigger Witch Doctor wheels were pretty nice for it, and I decided to keep those. And this one, really, I don't remember doing much of anything, but I know it got a couple wins here and there in Robot Madness and Season 7, and that's about it. I promise this is the final version of Scorpios, and this is definitely the best one. It now, of course, had a nice 3D printed plow that was a little bit better sized, and of course, with it being 3D printed now, the armor was definitely a bit better. New spinner up top too, and this was one that I did end up selling to a couple people. I did make one for the Scorpios team, and then I did also make one for Too Many Milk, so it definitely has been its way around, and I did make a version of it with the red saw for Robot Madness, which was overall pretty fun to use. Here is the one of Michael Bolton, which is from Hummel Creations, and this one I sent to him and now competes in his series when it infrequently goes on. This one overall is pretty simple. It's just a Witch Doctor base with some low forks. I believe this version of Michael Bolton competed in September of 2020, so it is pretty old at this point, but overall it was a pretty decent, simple replica, and even if it isn't anything super dangerous, it looks pretty nice and it's pretty low. This is the version of Seizure I talked about a little bit at the end of the last Seizure segment. This was definitely the worst one, which is kind of surprising because it looks exactly the same to the old one. The spinner kept falling off. The drive was really bad in the fight that it mattered in its elimination matchup against Monstrosity. And overall, I don't think anyone really misses this version of Seizure, especially when the new version of it really kind of is an absolute machine. This one kind of just walked so the new one could run. This was a new version of Vlad the Impaler, which in the end was incredibly similar to the previous one. No 3D printing with this one, kind of like the old one. The thing with this one that has always been kind of relevant with it was it never had any fights, but for some reason I tested it against a lot of my event robots for whatever reason. I don't know why exactly I disrespected it so much, but it is very dead because it's been hit by many powerful spinners in its day. Rest in peace, Vlad the Impaler V2. This was the Metal Siege redo that I did. I'm counting both this one and the one that followed that fixed some of the problems. It is in a clamp here because the mechanism broke when it was attached on, so this whole mechanism had to be basically scrapped until I got another Bronco. And that new version ended up being a bit better, but it did get destroyed pretty much by Buckeye in Robot Madness. So this overall did not see much success with this version of Metal Siege, but at least its presence led the way to the new one that is a lot better. once we lost Shockwave, we decided to put in Breaker Box as its sort of replacement. Of course, the robot from BattleBot Season 4. A very obvious robot to pick to make from a duck. I don't believe I was the first one to make one. I think Chicken Strips might have beat me to the punch. I decided to make Real No for season... Was it season 7, I think, of Robot Chaos? It was probably season 7. This one overall, don't remember it doing a whole lot, but overall it's a pretty simple, pretty nice looking model, I'd say. Loki is probably the best control bot I've ever had on the channel, another one from Alex the Hunted. This one, the best part about it is pretty simply, if it gets a grab, it is basically going to hold you for as long as it wants or until it is forced to let you go. Always had some very good tournaments, especially in Season 7, where it had a deep run with the #1 seed. And then, of course, in Robot Madness, it lost to Red Shield, which, not great, but it had a very good run, especially in Season 8, and overall, it was a very fun robot to have around. This new version of Blip fixed some of the key issues that were on the previous one. Not a total fix, but it definitely did help in some of the key areas. With it now using a blacksmith base and some actual proper forks, it was a lot lower, and that fixed some of the key issues that it had. The main thing that I did really hope to improve was the flipper power. It's slightly better, just slightly. It can get some flips if it gets it on the head, but it's not the greatest thing in the world, and I eventually did try to fix those more so in the next version. Krusty Grab was a very fun robot, and this one I think is best known for the wonderful suplex that it had against Krusty Grab in Season 7 of Robot Chaos, and also because it was featured in a Shafrillis Productions video. That was pretty funny. Somehow, Crustacean Devastation, if you look that up on Google, the video of this robot will be one of the first results, and that is why I'm pretty sure it ended up appearing. Very, very funny stuff with this one. This was always a great bot. This version of Buzzkill ended up definitely being the best one as I switched to a much more powerful motor on top of a tombstone base. It is very goofy looking in all honesty, but it always put up a very good performance, especially in Robot Chaos Season 8, where it managed to have a very solid run, going all the way to the round of 8 before fighting Metal Siege, who was just kind of impossible to beat that season. Overall, very fun robot though, and it's definitely one that will be sticking around for any future tournaments. I honestly have no memory of how long Sabretooth existed in my lineup, but I know who has replaced it, and I know that it currently is not with me anymore. Pretty simple mod of the Season 10 version of Sabretooth, with the back thrusters and the side armor and some double stacked wheels. I don't know why exactly I never finished the front. I guess I didn't really feel like it. I have no memory. This one really did not fight much though, so there's not much to go off of for it. Ripper was a very fun mod to work on. This one was a blacksmith with a integrated N20 to act as a flipper, which was a actually quite good flipping mechanism, and it was decently powerful considering it was just a N20, and it had a very good run both in Season 7, winning the gauntlet to get into the playoffs, as well as making a decent attempt at Robot Madness before it ran into Business Tombstone. Doesn't exist anymore, but it was fun to have around. This was my rendition of Warbird from Hummel Creations, using the blade from Warbird that was given to me by Hummel, and it is a overall very strong spinner. It did not have a good time in Season 7 because of some unfortunate issues it ran into with the spinner power, but it had a very good run overall in Robot Madness before an unlucky loss to Osprey, getting victories over both High Smashin and Cyclone. Very solid robot, did not have the greatest of times in some tournaments, but it was very fun. This is the version of Ocean Man that kind of stuck until eventually it was redesigned into Ocean Commotion. This one did no longer have the main super powerful spinner and went back to a stock Bite Force one, which still had a good amount of power all things considered, but it did not have the super strong knockout punch hitting that I feel like it did when it had that previous bigger motor. But overall, it did improve so much with the drive and the reliability that it overall was a pretty reasonable transition, and this one of course won Robot Madness. Following fighting it at Norwalk Havoc, Hive Smashin' was definitely one that I was excited to make. A very simple tombstone mod, as it is, I mean, it's basically just a tombstone with some cool decaling and a new spinner, but this one was super good in Season 7. Crashed out early in the tournament, but it was right in the race for that #1 seed until it had that fight with Loki, and this one definitely has always put up a very good showing. Another one that is not around anymore, but it was a very fun robot to have around. This one was a huge victory for me making this one because I previously tried to make a huge back the previous year and it just did not work out and things went up in smoke. This one though was very, very successful and eventually led to me making some versions of Huge for the team that they still have and was actually on the BattleBot show. That was very happy for me. That was probably one of my favorite moments of being on the channel and stuff like that. This one though, it had 2 fights in Robot Chaos and got sold. Here is Death by the Hit. This is based on the robot from Penguin Robotics. A pretty simple mod using a Matilda with just some front little armor pieces and then a disc in place of where the spinner typically would be. It had some pretty decent fights in all honesty. It did not make it super far in Season 7, crashing out in the Loki Gauntlet, but it had some very fun fights, especially its matchup against Rampage, which was overall a very fun fight. Not around anymore because it is now in possession of Penguin, but it is a fun bot. Monstrosity had quite the interesting career on the channel. It did not have the same power as the actual Monstrosity on Explosive Robotics channel, but it was still fun to have around. I had to go through a whole Frankenstein process to get this thing running again, and after a lot of trial and error, it was able to get back up and working. It did not have the greatest of showings in any of its tournaments that it was in, but it still was pretty fun, and it did get some pretty good shots in when it did have the opportunity. This was the new version of Frostburn for Robot Madness, as I felt it was the perfect time to bring it back, and it really, it kind of crashed and burned immediately, losing to Aquatic Disaster in the first round, but the shell does still live on, as I did retrofit it to be Ghost, and now the said Ghost is with Duck and now competes on Duck's channel, or I guess did. I don't know how much Duck is doing more fights and stuff at this point. But the shell does still exist. Frostburn doesn't, but the shell still exists. This was a result of doing a little spinning wheel of picking a model to make for a duck base, and Quantum won, and it was very complicated, but I did manage to get it all working, and it was super fun. And the process of turning it into an actual proper crusher was fully documented on the channel if you are interested. This one was a very fun one to work on, and I did eventually update it, and you'll see that updated version later on in this video. Another robot that has a full build process on the channel was this model of Lynx. Unfortunately, this one really did not last too long because it did have some issues in fighting, and honestly, looking back, I probably shouldn't have gotten rid of it so soon because it was a tough mod, and I think it did look quite good. But this one was a very fun one, and this was the one where the full process was documented like I mentioned, and the spinner was not super powerful, but it was fun to have around, and overall was a pretty good replica of Lynx. Cover your ears, Duck. It is Sea Dragon's Roar. This one was a pretty fun model to make. I did briefly use the chassis for Rampage for it, but it did not stick around for too long because Rampage just had more staying power for the channel's purposes, but it was a fun little one that I made during the period of time I was making a bunch of Norwalk replicas. I don't remember much about the fights that this one had, but I do remember it having a bit of issues with durability because it was all kind of glued on a bit weakly. Still a fun little replica though. The greatest robot to ever grace this planet Earth from the good man Chicken Strip Robotics is Zinger, his little lifter Beetleweight that competed in 2022 at Norwalk Havoc. This one is most well known on the channel for having the song in Robot Madness and always putting on a very fun showing, and this one is still around today. I do have to fix the servo, or the servo that is used to power the flipper, but I mean, how could I ever get rid of Zinger? I'd be wrong to do that. Next up, we have another Bite Force with a spinner. We have PGF, and this was not too difficult of a mod because all I had to do was take one of the beefier seizure-style motors and mount it upright and put the spinner on it, and it was pretty much good to go. This one is with Theo Hummel and was present in, I believe, the qualifying round for Hummelbots, and I might still be in future fights on that tournament whenever it comes out. You'll just have to ask Theo Hummel whenever that's coming out, because I don't even know myself. Another robot for Hummel Creations, we have Bloodbath. This one competed in some of the earlier Hummelbot seasons, and this was my little brief rendition of it before I turned it into something else. This one was a good little excuse to try out some dry brush painting methods, where you take a brush, put some paint on it, and then wipe it down so it's almost completely dry, and it helps make some really cool kind of battle scars and wear and tear, and that is kind of what I did on some of the top panels of this and the side Lego pieces, which was a pretty fun, this robot was overall pretty fun use to try some of that stuff out. What do you know? It's another Hummel robot. We have Jaws here. This one was kind of just a filler robot for the Robot Madness tournament, but it did have a pretty decent showing there, honestly, as a 15 seed, getting some pretty decent grabs against Behemoth before eventually it did get flipped. This one overall, a pretty decent kind of filler robot using a soccer base. Did not do a whole lot, but I do think it was pretty fun, and it did not have any 3D printed parts, and I like to make note of those as we get further down the line. This one very quickly ended up replacing Bloodbath because this one I thought was just a little bit more interesting, and this is a model of Pandemonium, which was another one of the Hummel Creations robots that was created I cannot English today. It was a Norwalk Havoc Beetle Weight. Drum spinner at the front, had some screw impactors. It was overall pretty cool. The weapon actually hit pretty strong, and it is still with Theo right now. This was my attempt to finally get Blip in a good state in terms of its flipper power, and I kind of succeeded, kind of didn't. This one was using a modified servo, which is another one I have a full video process, both this and Zinger, and overall, this one I did not keep the piano key setup because they just really were not that good at getting under stuff, and it did kind of conflict with the flipper, but overall this was definitely still a pretty solid project, and I got to learn a little bit more about using resistors for hex bugs. Next up, we have Luma's Plow from Lumakid. This is a pretty simple wedge bot based on the bot kit's Candy Wasp, if I am correct on that. I believe I am. This one competed in Robot Madness against Ripper, and it did not get super far before getting knocked out, but it was a pretty simple wedge bot, and a drive of it was always fun with the bigger wheels, and it always had a pretty fun fight, and it was always a pretty fun one to drive. Does not stick around much at this point, but it was fun while it was lasted. Filibuster. This one really did not last too long at all. This one had quite a few issues, mainly in the durability of the weapon. The discs would often kind of split, but then again, the real one did too, so I guess accuracy, and the uprights ended up having some durability issues. So this one pretty quickly ended up becoming something else, which I believe was Dietor down the line. Overall, it was not a bad replica, but it definitely had some issues. This was definitely one that I was quite happy with, and this was a new version of Captain Shredderator that used an entirely new custom 3D printed shell that was very compact and very much in scale, and this one did appear only in Robot Madness, I believe, where it got a win over Reaper, and while it did not compete too much after that, I did end up using the technology that I made for this into the new version of Silver Star, which hits like an absolute truck, so this was definitely a very successful project, and the shell looks quite nice. I don't remember why I chose to make Double Tap, but it definitely is something I did make. Using a rotator that was flipped upside down and using some neat little stuff with the spinner, I was able to make Double Tap that could kind of flail out the spinner, but improperly, of course. It was kind of cool. It died pretty much immediately because it had to go up against Atomic Green in Robot Madness, but overall I think it was a decent replica. Not great, but not bad. El Diablo was one that was pretty interesting to make. This one was based on a version that competed at the Comedy Central era of BattleBots. I know there was a version that I believe has been part of Destructathon now, but I decided to go for one of the previous ones, and this one I actually carved out some channels in the wheels for a Witch Doctor to put some treads in, and they ended up working decently well, but they did end up falling off, I'd say more commonly than the actual build your own tank base does, so it wasn't perfect, but it was a decent replica. Based on the British Hammerbot that the bot builder made for Robot Combat Models War of Independence, it is Double Decker Death, a double-decker bus with a hammer on it. This one was a fun one. It was kind of just put into Robot Madness to unfortunately lose to Ocean Man, but it was a very fun replica, and Misa in Robot Wars is what it says on the front panel there. If you know what that robot is, you get a cookie. The new version of Killer Crab using a tombstone was very, very similar to the old one in terms of functionality, but it did have a rear wedge now, so if it did go against a spinner, it could have a bit more armor to go against it instead of just losing the claws by driving right into the weapon. This one is most known in my mind for the fight against Silver Star, where it was getting killed by Silver Star and then Silver Star just died, but you know, that's par for the course for Silver Star, so you know, what can you do? Didn't last too long, but it was alright. This was the new version of Jab using a Bite Force instead, and it was overall very low and very controllable, and it put quite a good showing on in Robot Madness, getting 2 victories over Ramplant and Blindside before losing to Seizure, which you can't really blame it too much for that. This one was quite fun though, and that wedge was very, very annoying for some robots to deal with, especially Blindside. Poor Blindside, always fighting big wedges. This was never present on the channel from what I remember, but this was a new version of Ramplant that I made for the commentator Luke, who previously used to commentate for NHRL. In this one, I used some little screws, put it on the wedge to make it more realistic, and also made a custom controller for it so that it could match with the robot. This one was a fun little project to work on when I was doing some commission stuff. I don't do any commissions anymore, so don't ask. But this one was fun, and it was a good little way to improve on. Joining the gang of front hinge robots, we have Standalone. This one was using a Whiplash base and is from Chicken Strip Robotics. Originally was a tank base on his channel, but I decided to try it out with a Whiplash so that the arm could get in a bit more engagement. And this one was quite fun. It did run into a snowblind shaped wall in Robot Madness, but it was very fun and it was quite a good control bot when it was competing on the channel. Ripperoni was a very fun one to work on. This one was right after I think it might have been during the Season 7, I don't remember exactly, but this one was quite fun. I had to go through quite a bit of trials to get this one working, and it was another one that I have a full video of the process on, where I had to go through and basically remake it all with a bigger chassis in order to get it a bit more to scale. The wheels are not the different sizes like the real one is, but you know, I'm not going through the effort of doing all that. Overall though, this was a very fun model to work on, even if it isn't around anymore. Siren was a robot from Typhoon Robotics, and I do not remember why exactly I made Siren, but I know it was because of some kind of competition that Typhoon Robotics won that led to me making it. And overall, this one was a pretty fun front hinge flipper. It got a win over Rampage in Robot Madness, of course, as the 15th seed, and then eventually it ended up losing to Osprey, but this one was quite fun, and overall, it was a very powerful front hinge flipper too, and it could flip basically anything that got on the lid. Making a new version of Dietor with proper felt was something that I did want to do at some point, and for Robot Madness it felt like the perfect time because Robot Madness was originally going to be the last tournament on the channel, so it was the perfect time to have it and El Dominador have a good old scrap for that spot and see who could win the rematch of the first ever fight on the channel. El Dominador ended up getting the Blast Laugh, but this one was a very nice little model from a Sawblaze, and with the felt it was quite accurate, and I think it's definitely the best Dietor I ever made. This is the Seizure that has been building up to across all other Seizures showcased today. This one is the one that is definitely the best and the most powerful, and had the incredible run in Robot Madness, and also quite a good run in Season 8, and also on other channels. This one has been both in Arizona for Mecha Mayhem on Luke Robotics channel, and also for Duckbots with Duck, and this one has been quite around a lot of places, and definitely watch Build-A-Boy's video if you want to learn more about Seizure. Havoc V2, this one was, you can definitely tell it was from El Diablo with those cutouts and the wheels kind of filled in. It had not really too much new compared to the old version in terms of how it worked. It was still without any major ground game, just with a new spitter and a very similar motor. And overall, it had a couple wins, but it did not last too long because there was some issues that it had run into with it, mainly with the reliability in the drive, but that was just a bigger issue with the V1 Witch Doctors. This robot, I still do not know why on earth I gave it a 16 seed, because turns out this is actually a very, very good Hexbug, honestly, which who would have thought? But this was of course a model of Yugoslav Yeeter put into Hexbug form. As the 16 seed, it managed to take down Krusty Grab in the tournament, and overall had a very fun, good run across several tournaments, and now is in the Yeeter Beetleweight form on Duck's channel. Death by Monkeys. This is Death by Monkeys. Death by Monkeys is a robot from the classic era. I made this Death by Monkeys using a Witch Doctor V2 base. This is Death by Monkeys. It's a pretty good robot. It lasted maybe 5 days, but I think the world is better off with the fact that I did make Death by Monkeys. Thank you for watching. This is Death by Monkeys. Here is a new version of Spellbound that did not fight once. I made it, and then originally it was going to be in Robot Madness, but then eventually I had an opportunity to get Osprey all working, so I ended up not using it. It looked pretty nice, though. It would have not really done much, though, because it doesn't have much ground game, and it is kind of just a contact spinner, but overall it did look nice, and it's spellbound. It lost to Stratospheric, and it'll never get forgiven for that. Debuting on the channel for Robot Madness was Aquatic Disaster, a robot originally from Ultimate Robotics, or just Ultimate Bots. This one was a big old cage spinner put onto the normal build-your-own spinner mechanism on a tank base, and it was quite decent and got some big wins in Robot Madness over both Scorpios and Frostburn before running into Ocean Man, so you can't blame it too much. Fortunately, it did have issues that led to it not continuing to compete further on in its career, but it was quite good when it was here. Sad Octopus, this is a replica from the famous DuckBots Norwalk Havoc machine that has gone to several primetime showings and of course was a finalist for 2025. This was based on the version that competed in 2023 that I gave to him at the event that I was at with him with Filibuster. And overall, this one has had quite a bit of success on Duck's channel and made it to the Elite 8 round in Robot Madness before dying to Seizure, so it's definitely had a good fair share of success in its time. This was Original Sin. Originally, this was going to actually be a new version of free shipping, but then there was some issues with getting the spinner properly working in it, so then I decided to just turn it into Original Sin. This, of course, was also made from the Lynx chassis because Lynx did not stick around, and it kind of just immediately died to Blindside, and it kind of just faded away after that. Not too much else to add to this one. It was here and then it died. Next up we have Osprey. This one was the big ol' spinner from WD Dynamics. This one, all the parts were designed by him. I simply just kind of put it together with my own stuff to get it going for Robot Madness. And overall, it was quite good in Robot Madness, getting some good wins and eventually dying in the Elite 8 to, I believe it was Snowblind. Yeah, it was Snowblind. Of course it was. Overall, very solid robot, and just had some unlucky luck running into Snowblind. Business Tombstone. This is Business Tombstone, the greatest robot to ever grace this planet Earth. It is, for some reason, so incredibly godly powerful. I'm pretty sure it's the bee on top. I cannot be sure, but it is an educated guess that the bee gives it some additional power, and there's nothing else to say. This is the greatest robot in the channel's history, and if you're wrong, you could just go argue with a wall. Doomba was a fun replica to make using a full custom chassis and then a motor for the spinner and also for the upward moving saw. This one I did actually got a picture of it near the real Doomba, which I don't remember where that picture was, but I know I have it somewhere. This one was quite fun though, and it did not last too long because unfortunately it just was not too practical in some regards, but overall it was a very fun one to make, and I do believe I shared the files with this with the team, so maybe they'll make it at some point. Going from one Doomba, now we have just Doom with Noba. This one was using the base from Complete Control and had a combination of a beta chassis with a Whiplash setup. This one was kind of cool, but honestly, the spinner power was very weak and the drive was really not that good. You kind of had to hold the weapon button down for it to drive decently, so it really did not last too long, and I don't miss it particularly too much. It was kind of cool when it existed. It was a decent replica that was pretty simple, but it was not great. This one was quite a fun product to work on though. This was my first kind of proto-melty. I wouldn't really call it a melty, of course, because you can't really make those, but when it got hits, Project Liftoff got some really nice shots that would just throw stuff around because it was basically the entire robot being a weapon, and some other people have also made some similar stuff with this same format, and eventually I did do a new version of this in Hellbound, which you will see a bit later. This one overall is a pretty fun one to work on. And next up, we have Crash Fet. Going into the next robot we have here, we have Trash Talk. This was a robot made by Chicken Strip Robotics, originally as, I believe, an Antweight, and was made up just of a bunch of styrofoam paneling, and it got completely shredded, and it was very funny, so I made my own version of it as a Sawblaze mod, and he owns it currently, and I did actually see it quite recently because there was some fights with it, which maybe will be seen at some point. Overall, it's a pretty fun little model, though. Minor Threat was a good little crossbreed mod between a blacksmith hammer and a whiplash base. By attaching the hammer motor and setup to the lifter's thing, you can basically make a functional hammer, and this was between this and Aggro Whopper, and I decided to go for this. And it has both an interchangeable fork setup and as well as a plow, and I did eventually redesign it with a new version, but this one overall still had some fun little moments and was around for a couple tournaments, namely the Rookies Cup. Health Code Violation was another mod using a whiplash with some little panels at the front. The creator of this one was Tigerhawk, and it uses the saw that originally was on Scorpios for Robot Madness. This one was around for Robot Chaos Season 8 from what I remember for just the qualifying round, but did not stick around too long. It had a few issues with drive because I think just the bigger wheels caused some problems with it. Overall, it did look pretty nice though, and it was a pretty fun one to work on with no 3D printed parts. Alternate Dimension was a bot originally by Botjammer, aka Funky, and this one was using some big wheels on a whiplash base with the front wedge, and this one did manage to win that Rookies Cup tournament that we did, and it actually had a pretty decent showing, all things considered, in Robot Madness. It did run into, I believe it was Ocean Commotion for its last match, where it wasn't able to do much with it, but it did make the season and do some decent fights. This is still what I believe to be my greatest replica I have ever made. This was Fusion. This one took so long doing all of the art and paneling to make it look nice and good with both of these spinners functioning. It was super fun to use. It did not last too long at this point because I did want to use those Eternals for something else, but I still do have all these parts assembled as a nice little model. And this is one that definitely I think is the magnum opus of what I learned with replica making. This was Wombo Combo, which was a vertical spinner from SC. Originally, I believe it was a video game robot for Robot Rumble 2, and this one hit like an absolute truck, especially if you watched it in the Robot Chaos Season 8. It got some crazy shots, unfortunately had a tough loss to Loki where it got stuck on the shelf, but it had some really fun moments, and that spinner was an absolute machine, getting some big hits both on Ember and Silver Star. Next up we have Hypnosis, which was an overhead bar spinner from Random Robotics. Very comparable in a way to how Red Zone would work. This one had a different designed wedge though, with some angles that was a bit better at getting deflections. This one was made using the chassis for Hive Smashing, but because there was some issues with durability because those wheels previously broken, it was a little bit tough to drive, but I have gone ahead and fixed that, and at some point I might end up updating it with an improvised tri-bar, but that'll mostly just happen if Season 9 happens. And now we have the final rendition of Ocean Man, and that is of course Ocean Commotion, the newest version with a aircraft theme with the runway on top and a bit more nauticalness, we'll go with that. This one unfortunately did not work super good in Season 8, but it did have some fun moments, especially in March Mayhem where it got some nice shots in, and competed with Luke and Oatmeal Robotics in Arizona for Mecha Mayhem Season 2. Or Mechanical Mayhem, I don't know, it's one or the other. This was one that I was a contributor for, first of a couple that will be seen soon, and Hail was originally made by Chicken Strip, and he sent it to me to help fix some of the issues that it had, mainly with the spinner reliability, and I fixed it by putting Ripperoni's spinner on it. This competed also in Robot Chaos Season 8, where it actually got a win over Under Destruction, getting it stuck on the pit panel and taking the W. This was a pretty fun one, and actually decently effective for being a thwackbot, all things considered. This one was kinda made just for fun. This is Bird Strike from Kokoto Mane of Team Get Wrecked Robotics, and this one overall was pretty fun. This was a robot that competed at a few plastic Antway competitions up at WPI. It did not work super good, and the motors were really struggling, but it was a fun one to work on, and it's, I don't know, it looks pretty nice. He's a nice little guy, even if he doesn't move or work very good. Making Snowblind invertible was kind of like just giving Thanos the last Infinity Stone. In theory, in practice, it didn't work very good. This one really did have some issues in Season 8. I think the drive just suffered from these belts being stretched a little bit more than they usually were, and that resulted in it not being able to get some victories. Still, though, this definitely is a solid robot because it is Snowblind, although it definitely could have been a little bit better. All in all, though, it's Snowblind, and it was a decent attempt to try to fix some of its issues. This was Icebreaker from, fittingly, Icebreaker Robotics, and it competed in Season 8 to some success, some no success. Mostly it just had some issues with the reliability, because I feel like Witch Doctor V2s never really have the greatest reliability, in all honesty. I don't really know if there's a way around that, but after landing some big shots, it would just kind of die out, which was unfortunate. But overall, it was, I think, a pretty good looking rendition of Icebreaker, and I wish it was able to work a bit better. This was Titan from Oof Robotics, and this was my first attempt at making a Hexbug Suplexer, and overall it worked decently well. It had a few issues, and it really was just too weak to get any proper flips using the Whiplash internals, where you can really only hold onto the button for so long to properly control and get a good grab, but it did pave the way to the robot that we're going to see in a moment. It didn't really do that great either in filming, and it stuck around for a little bit, but overall it was still a fun one to work on. All of the stuff that I learned from making Titan did go through to making Ember, and this is probably one of my favorite robots I have ever made. It is incredibly strong using the grappler, and there is basically nothing that this thing can't get a good grab on, and I don't think I've run into anything that this thing can't flip. A really good complete control grappler, Call Viper style robot that is super zippy and just really good at getting good bites in. Like I mentioned, it's probably one of my favorite mods I've ever made. Here's another one I was a contributor for. Buckeye was sent to me for both Robot Madness and also hung around for Robot Chaos Season 8, and I decided to list it here because I did go through and help with some renovations for it for Season 8 by giving it some new spinners, as well as the top little buffer that was given to me and that front wedge, and it really did have a great showing in Season 8. Probably the best robot in that entire season. Unfortunately, getting an unlucky loss to Metal Siege in that season. It was an absolute workhorse, though. I realized I only had Cyclone at the beginning, and it did go through quite a bit of changes, and I felt this was the one that probably was worth most for the mentioning again. I did go through and just repainted the blade a little bit and added some newer versions of the side armors and the side buffers that first appeared in Season 7 in the fight against Blindside. The biggest issue that Cyclone always has had has been the drive, and it does kind of spin out at times. And Cyclone, I'm not sure if it'll be back in any real capacity without a big redesign, but overall, Cyclone's always been fun. Here you can see a Lego man taped in fear to the back of He. He is a robot from Shiken, and this thing is very, very fun. This had a very fun fight in Season 8, getting completely chucked by Buckeye. Just a big ol' spinner on top of a build-your-own-bot base. Didn't get the most wins per se, but it was always fun to have, and it did hit really hard when it was able to get a good engagement. Not much else to say other than he's up there for greatest bot of all time. A robot from LML, we have Bolt, a pretty simple mod here. It is just a Witch Doctor with some of the Sawblaze forks attached to the front to give it some good ground game at the front. Had a few issues that we ran into in Season 8, where the forks kind of hindered the drive, and we ended up removing them briefly because of that. Overall, this one was quite fun, and I did recently renovate it with some better wheels so that the forks work better with it. And this is quite a fun one, and hopefully will be competing in the future if Season 9 does happen. Next up, we have Reign of Terror from T-Shadow. This is a longer kind of flipper style design initially, but I did end up running into some issues with the ground game and the control to get stuff on the flipper head, so I ended up moving to a bit of a shorter kind of bucket style scoop that was a bit more comparable to what worked well with Ripper. This one is of course using Ripper's chassis, and it did not have the best success in any of its fights, but it is one that is still fun to use, and with the new version, if a season does happen, it definitely could have some good showings. When Ultimate's bot Aquatic Disaster unfortunately ran into some issues with the weapon, I ended up having to switch to Tanky Boy, which was another bot from Ultimate, which is basically just a push bot, but with some kind of cool decaling and some cool paintwork on the treads. This one was unfortunately kind of doomed from the start because its matchup was going to be Ursa Major, who we're going to get to pretty soon. But overall, it was a nice little one just to fill in the gap and put something there, at least. Ursa Major was a very ambitious project. Using what I have learned a little bit from making the Lafayette Flipper, I managed to put that all into a Hexbug package, and this thing was an absolute machine. The strongest Hexbug Flipper I believe that still is around, and overall this one was super fun to work on. It did not do the greatest, and it ended up kind of flipping itself at times, but this one was one where I learned a lot, and it was very small and compact, which was kind of surprising considering the crazy power this thing's flipper has. Squish was a robot from Oatmeal Robotics that I took the parts from to make for Season 8, but unfortunately it just ran into issues with the spinner not working the greatest and the drive just not being super strong, so it did not last very long after Season 8 concluded, which was unfortunate, but you'll see some more Luke bots eventually, which will kind of help explain some of the other stuff related to it. It was pretty fun to attempt to make it work at least. This version of Metal Siege was absolutely the best, winning Season 8 and overall just being a very well-rounded design, using the combination of the Whiplash base and the Bronco Flipper mech. I believe it was Oof Robotics that initially tried something like this, and this was my version of it. And overall, this thing is just a really good combination. Using a powerful flipper on a Whiplash base is super good for control and just getting in effective flips. And this is one that definitely is super fun. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you haven't seen it, watch it fight in Season 8. I recommend it. Next up, we have Malice. This was a very fun replica. I originally made a version of Malice for the Battle RC Season 7 replica pack, and I decided to take what I did for there and apply it into a Hex Bug. And overall, this one was very fun, and it actually hit super strong too, which was quite surprising. Using the motors, the stock motors from the Whiplash were quite strong in this thing, which was interesting. This one was a very nice replica, and overall, probably one of my favorite replicas I've done. Fennec was a robot built by Yttrium, and it was a drum spinner that originally was a Lego bot that I kind of retrofitted to be a Hex Bug. And this one, I don't feel like it had many fights, but it was overall a pretty nice little version of a Lego robot that I made with a spinner at the front. The main issue that I remember this one having was some pretty intense wheeling, and that really did not have too many good ways to fix that. But overall, it was pretty fun, and it's just a nice looking robot. He's pretty neat. This robot has a very interesting history. So one of my friends in the Robot Combat community is a Texas Rangers fan, and I said if the Rangers win the World Series, then I will make a Rangers-themed robot, and lo and behold, the Rangers won the World Series that year. So I ended up making this, which was based on, I believe, Wham Bam from the classic season of BattleBots, and it is literally just a baseball bat that spins on this base. It's awesome. It competed in March Mayhem and actually got a win over this robot here, Talon. Talon was one that was definitely ambitious as being a actually proper crusher design with a proper metal titanium beak, and it basically couldn't really crush things at all. Unfortunately, without a proper sturdy base, it really wasn't possible for it to get a good puncture before it just started breaking itself, and it died pretty quickly in March Mayhem. It was a fun product to work on, but overall, using Ember's base for it was not the brightest thing in the world. Next, we have another robot from Duck, and fittingly enough, it's another four-wheel drive drum spinner kind of design. This one was Try Hard, which was originally a Battle RC design made by Duck, and this one was one that I wanted to retrofit using a dedicated Sri mech, as well as, of course, the drum in the middle. And this one did compete on Duck's channel, but I don't believe that tournament was released or is going to be released. But it was overall pretty fun, and it did do decently well in March Mayhem, getting a couple wins before, unfortunately, dying to top off from what I remember. Generator was a robot originally designed by Chicken Strip Robotics, and I decided to retrofit it all to work on a Witch Doctor base. Unfortunately, this one had a ton of issues, and the ground game was just not very good, and it was just too big. But overall, I think it did look really nice, and it was a nice little product to retrofit a video game robot into a digital form, and this was a fun little collab. It is not around anymore, but I think it looks pretty neat. We have another contributor spot here with Polymer. This one was a collaboration between me and Oatmeal Robotics, where I helped design a 4-bar lifter design, and he designed the rest of the chassis to make a first Hexbug 4-bar lifter mod. And this one overall was pretty cool. It sounds like it's not been the greatest on his channel, unfortunately, but overall it was still a fun project, and it is still... It was the first 4-bar lifter, so, you know, can't really be too mad at it for maybe not being the most effective thing in the world. This was a version of Yoink that was based off the video game version of Yoink that I made, and eventually would become the IRL Yoink that would compete at Norwalk Havoc. Pretty simple, just a low fork bot with a lifter at the front. This one was actually incredibly small, and if I did remake it, I definitely would have scaled it up a little bit, because that small scale definitely didn't help it in some regards, but even then it was still a nice little model, and it is still around today. Thunder V2. Everyone loves Thunder. Of course, the one I mentioned before that had a 1-0 all-time record. I decided to remake it using the same big wheel Whiplash chassis and an undercutter. And of course, as soon as it got here, it immediately lost to Stingray. The meme died as soon as that happened. This one was still kind of a fun little project, though. I think it was a pretty interesting design to try out. Even if it did not work out, I do like undercutters, and I've still been trying to get an undercutter that works decently effectively. The Captain, this was a robot that has competed at several of the macro events I have been at, and I've lost to it, I believe, 2 times and only beat it once. It was a very fun little product, this one. I decided to use a geared setup where I had 2 motors at the top that both drove gears at the bottom to drive the wheels, which basically meant I had to invert all of the wiring how I normally did, and this one hit quite hard and overall was a fun little, condensed little project. Next up, this was one that I had been on my mind for quite a while, and this was, of course, Red Devil. This was originally going to be the claw version, but I realized that was simply just too complex for the Hexbugs, so I moved to using the Season 3 Plow version that fought in the Monsoon fight, and this is what ended up coming out of it. The saw was very strong, just using one of the stock motors from, I believe, the Witch Doctor V2. It ended up hitting really hard, which was pretty cool, and it is not around anymore, but the saw was quite strong. Next up was Rush DeLarge, which was a robot from Fat Cat Powerhouse Robotics, or the Robot Hell YouTube channel, and it was pretty simply just a mod with a Witch Doctor V2 based on a video game robot. I ended up recently fixing it up and getting it all working recently, but this was the one that came before it that had some issues I had to fix with the belting, but now it works good, and it's a pretty simple, decently effective little Witch Doctor V2 mod. Next, we have the most recent updated version of Snowblind, going away from the black and red style to back what it was with the lighter blues. This one is kind of different from the old ones in that it no longer is treaded, and it just has bigger wheels at the back, which means that it is a lot faster than the older ones as well. And with the low edge, it still is low like it was before, but it is a bit more uncontrollable now with the faster speed, so if we do have a Season 9, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that faster speed ends up playing a role. This was the new updated version of Quantum that I made using the new teeth and the new wedge. As I made the version of this for the Battle RC replica pack, I decided to retrofit my Quantum for it, and this one has a few issues with the traction that I do have to fix, but overall it is definitely a bit more accurate than the previous Quantum was, and overall it's a nice little replica to have around, and I do like the nice little wedge at the front. It took a while to get that to look good. Krusty Grab left for a little while after Robot Madness, but I decided it was probably a good robot to bring back because it was quite fun and it was a good little grabbing suplexer bot, and thus I returned it with a new, better designed front design so that the forks would be a bit more durable, as well as keeping the stock kind of mount plates for the Whiplash intact so the arm would be just a little bit more durable. Following the kind of success of Project Liftoff, I ended up making this, which was called Hellbound, and it was a kind of pill-shaped Melty Brain-esque kind of design. It's very interesting, I'll say that. I feel like I saw a picture of a robot that kind of had a similar design to this at one point, and then decided to kind of replicate it as my own. Never has really fought much at all. It is kind of fun to plink around with a few random fights, though, because I can get some big hits. This robot, I don't have a proper footage or video of it right now, but it was using a motor I got from Duckbots to make Sawsum, which is also a robot from Duckbots, and it was basically just a witch doctor with a massive saw and a big motor, and this one will not be appearing on the channel at all if it does come back. It hit like a truck, though, and generally putting a saw like this on a Hexbug is not the greatest of ideas, but it is fun. This one literally lasted maybe a day. This was a model of Chomp that used the rusty electronics, actually, where I would take out the drive pods and then connect them up to the platinum base, and with that I was able to kind of just do a Frankenstein of rusty parts with the platinum. But the problem with this Chomp was that it was just super out of scale, and it was so out of scale to the point that it really was just kind of comical. So after that I ended up replacing it pretty quickly and trying some other stuff with this, but it looked pretty nice. Everyone loves Bombshell. It was only a matter of time until eventually I had to end up making a new version of Bombshell. I went with the Season 3 design because all the other versions would need a really difficult to design kind of pulley between the front and back wheels, and this one was definitely the easiest. And this one, it's just glorious. It's Bombshell. Bombshell in Season 3 was just a fun time. And it also recently competed actually in a Plastic Antweight tournament with the Multibot Huge Thunderstorm Nightmare, which was quite fun. It is quite unfortunate that this Hydra did not work out because I spent so long on the paint job, but at least it's leading to a new Hydra that I am working on, and hopefully will be completed sometime in the future. Main issue with this one was that it used the drive pods that Chomp had been using, and they were all the way at the back, so the drive was quite poor. And the flipper mechanism, I tried to do a custom flipper mech, but unfortunately it just did not work out with trying to make my own springs to get it to be a bit more powerful, so it never really saw the light of day, but at least the paint job looked pretty nice. Spitting Mayhem, the robot from, I think this version was supposed to compete in a newer season of BattleBots, or at least it entered and maybe got rejected. I'm not fully aware exactly, but I went with this one. It had the cool blue aesthetic and the cool Thunderbolts on the outside. This one was a plug and play with the new version of Silver Star, essentially, where I could switch out the base if I wanted to try the other one. So overall, it was a nice little model, and rest in peace. Apollo, this one was the final option for using those rusty drive pods, and this one I did actually manage to get my own custom flipper mech working properly, which used some parts from the Build Your Own, and it was able to fit in near the front of the flipper on this robot. This one is quite fun, honestly. I think it is a very nice looking replica. It had a couple issues with getting the mechanism to work, but once it does work, it is able to get a decent amount of flips, and the drive is quite strong, so this is one that definitely will be around in the future for any future tournaments. This was a new version of Minor Threat, which took advantage of some of the main changes that kind of needed to happen with the old one, which was just a bit of a sturdier front with some different forks, and also worked because Build-A-Boy did end up making a new version of Minor Threat, so this coincided with that nicely. A bit of an updated look at the top, and I did change up how I mounted the hammer with the head a little bit, as it is basically just a dulled X-Acto knife, so it can get some strong shots, but it won't accidentally cut you or anything. This is definitely one of my favorite recent replicas. It took a while to get working, but this thing is very flat. Those are Bite Force wheels that it does run with, and they do poke out the top unlike the real one, but in order to get it as low as possible, that was pretty much necessary. I had to change up a few different options with the motors for it, with using between modified servos and an N20, and it does work now with an N20. And if you do see in the top left corner of the robot is the old Chaotic Robotics logo, which I thought was a good inclusion since this is a CC era bot. Here is the previous mentioned new version of Silver Star, which used the fully custom base that originally came about when I designed up Captain Shredderator, and this one is just an absolute machine. It hits incredibly hard using a new Seizure style motor, very similar to what the Captain Shredder used, but it is a little bit stronger. This is the best version of Silver Star, not like there was really much competition or like it was really hard to be better than previous versions, but this one does hit really hard, and the drive is nice with the new Platinum electronics. This was a gift from Luke of Oatmeal Robotics after filming with Mecha Mayhem, after he sent back all the bots that I sent for that competition. I had to do a little bit of fixing up for it because there was some issues that I had to fix with the receiver, which included me having to basically reprint part of the shell to make it fit properly, but overall it works quite good, and now it also has a Lego Man glued to the flipper because apparently it ended up helping with self-righting. This one is one of my favorite ones to drive though. This one, honestly, I really did not do much, but I decided to include it anyway because it does, you know, it looks pretty cool. This is Missile, another robot from Oatmeal, and this one is absolutely insanely powerful. It uses a drone motor on the inside to spin up, and this thing hits probably harder than any other robot I have when it gets a good bite. Through some testing, it is just broken. The back wheels did break, so I did have to replace them with some Witch Doctor ones that I kind of modded myself, but this one is incredibly fun to use, and it hits really hard. This was a collaborative effort, kind of. There was 3 people really involved with this. LML, or Living Murphy's Law, made the design for the shell of Megatron, and the spinner was given to me by Luke, which was originally from his robot Tungsten, and then I put all the electronics and got it all fitted to be a Hexbug, and it created a nice little hodgepodge of some different creators, all laid into one model of Megatron from Norwalk Havoc. This one moved quite good with the N10 drive, and overall was pretty fun. This was another replica of a duck machine. This one originally another Battle RC robot. Enigma. Originally, it actually had a flipper, but because it was basically impossible to get a flipper to work on the base of a rotator, I ended up just going with a low front with the mismatched colored forks and the rear spinner in the back, and this one drives quite good, and the ground game is very low, so I'd say it's definitely a pretty practical mod as far as rotators go in the very few rotator mods that do exist. Next up, we have another mod from Shiken, and this is Zeus. Well, not from Shiken, but a robot originally made by Shiken. Zeus, which is the stand-in right now for Wombo Combo, uses the same kind of belt to pulley ratio that made Wombo Combo really strong, but with a much more durable spinner and overall a bit more of a durable design for the Hexbug scale. This one was quite fun. The only clip of it, though, is of course it getting disassembled by Seizure, but in fights, this thing definitely will be a force to be reckoned with if it does ever come to that. The first model I ever made of a robot from Team Panic was Run For It, which was a 150-gram ant weight that ended up winning a competition, and as someone who always likes front hinge flippers, as I've made quite a few of them, this one was a design that I always thought was pretty fun, and this is another one that uses that whiplash with those giant wheels, and with the front hinge, it is kind of a combo of those previous big wheel bots, and also what made standalone work pretty good in Robot Madness, and it is also very fast to drive with those big wheels. It's another Shiken robot. This one is Flash Freeze, which was a double disc other Battle RC mod, and there was a version without the double disc and one with it, but because I had Enigma, I decided it was best to do the double disc version so it was a bit more unique. The power of the spinners is really not much because honestly, the rotator is not the strongest model in the world, but this one is pretty fun. I don't know how effective it'll be actually in combat, but I think it does look pretty nice, and rotator mods are always fun. We have the new version of Nitrius, you know, the mod I made probably almost 7 years ago at this point. It's back in a new form, this one very much based on Carbide, as I originally was planning to make this as a new Cobalt mod, but then pivoted to making it a new Nitrius because I thought that'd be pretty funny. All 3 printed parts, and with the front mounting plates actually screwing into the tombstone, it is definitely more durable, and overall should be able to hit a lot harder, similar on the level of Business Tombstone, hopefully. Next up, second to last, as far as I remember, we have Huge, and this was an updated version from Pro League. This was similar to the version that I sent to the team. The main differences was that the wheels were designed a little bit differently to be a bit thicker and also made out of TPU, so they would be able to take shots more easily, similar to how the real Huge would. And of course, the spinner is reminiscent to what they competed with in Pro League. And overall, this is definitely the best looking one. I also did wire it up to have 2 spinner motors just in case it wanted more power. And the last Hexbug on this list is actually not even one that's finished yet, but it's the new version of Hydra that I'm working on. And one of the main differences between this is I made the wedges all one plate, so that would be a bit easier to mount and also to be a little bit less congestion in that front wedge area. And it also now is big enough to fit a Bronco flipper mechanism so that it should be able to flip with actually good power this time because the previous version simply did not. And hopefully we will see this one before the summer ends. Really just depends if I get back into Hexbugs in that time. We have finally reached the competition robots and event robots, and we are going to be starting off with Chaos. This is basically the robot that was around as soon as the channel began. The blue, most of the life it was blue, the Viper Lifter that was in the 3rd video on the channel, and it never fought in combat besides if you count a later version of the robot I'm going to show later on. It was basically just there, and it was a fun little Viper project to kind of pave the way to everything that followed it in terms of our competition robots. Of course, with Chaos, you also need Carnage, and this was Filming Buddy's Antweight with the Bloodsport spinner and also just being a Viper kit. Another good one that kind of showed a bit more about using spinners and making spinners work and all that fun stuff like that. There's not too much to say with this one in terms of competition because also, like Chaos, it really never fought at all, but the internals of this definitely did go into making some future mods and robots, which was quite fun. One of the first products we had for making our own Antweight was Red Scare, which was a welded aluminum frame that we could mount in the basic Viper electronics inside of, and this one unfortunately never ended up competing at all. It did get to a point of completion where it had a front wedge on it that was red with the little hammer and sickle thing. Did not really fight at all, and because we just prioritized plastic ants, never really had an opportunity, but the shell is still around. The first of the wave of our plastic ants was Swiss Virginia. Very simply, it was just Viper internals in a wedge, two-wheel drive wedge bot. It was very much just kind of a Viper kit put into a very Viper-looking frame, but this did pretty good in competition, going 4-2 and getting 4th place in its first ever event. And in the end, it fought a bunch of horizontals, and this thing was basically indestructible because it was full invul and just a brick with thick walls, so it was kind of hard for it not to do good against horizontals, I guess. The partner to Swiss Virginia for that first event was Danish Inquisition, a two-wheel drive, dustpan-style grabber robot. This one I do remember because when it was supposed to be registered, Spanish Inquisition was already taken as a name, so instead of calling it another, we just went with Danish Inquisition, because that one sounded the closest to Spanish. Overall, this one did not have the greatest of success, but it was a pretty fun robot, honestly, and I always look back at this one pretty fondly. I think it looks pretty cool, honestly. This new version of Swiss Virginia got 3rd at the event that it took place at, and had a little bit of a different gimmick, being that I could switch out from different wedge designs if I wanted to. However, the other wedge designs really were not as practical as the main wedge was, so I never really had a reason to switch between the other designs. It does look pretty cool, though I guess it had a slight translucent look, and it did have a bit more damage than the first one did because weight was not as high on it, but overall it was pretty good. This was a new version of Danish Inquisition that unfortunately got kind of wrecked in combat against bigger horizontals, but it was quite fun and it did have the wider dustpan so it could actually grab robots easier. Unfortunately, it just ran into a ring spinner in Squirrelcane for its first fight, which really did a number on it. Overall, it still definitely looked a lot better and was definitely a better version of Danish. It just was kind of unfortunate in that it ran into a big spinner that kind of ruined its day. Continuing on with the lifespan of the Swiss Virginia style was adding a flipper, obviously, very comparable to how the Viper worked. This one was the first version of Lafayette, and it was just same design but with a flipper in the middle, and the top plate was split in half to try and accommodate the flipper. This one, I don't think it ever competed. The event it was supposed to compete at ended up getting canceled because COVID kind of took hold, but overall it looked pretty nice, and eventually it paved the way to future Lafayettes that were actually more successful. Drunken Irishman was the second or third robot, I guess, by Filming Buddy, and it was a vertical spinner with kind of a sloped front with a wedge down the middle and a spinner. And this one did get through quite a good bit of testing and had some good fights with early versions of Yugoslav Eater. Unfortunately, at the one event it was at, it kind of just smoked up because of some issues with electronics, which was a bit of a shame because this was probably one of my favorite designs that we have had for one of the plastic ant weight styles. Unfortunately, just didn't pan out. The first of the complete nonsense fairy weights that I made was Mauricio, which was based on the meme where Mauricio says he can't move it anymore and is stuck in a wheelchair, which was very, very funny. This one had a thwack arm at the back with some massive wheels and of course looked like a wheelchair. This one never competed, but it did go to a Test and Tune event where it had a kind of really boring fight with a spinner that didn't work. It's Mauricio. And immediately following Mauricio was a new version, which was a little bit larger and actually had an arm using a servo underneath it, in which that servo could lift the whole thing up and down, kind of like a really bad version of Defender, is probably what I would compare it to. This one really did nothing because, of course, it didn't compete, but I think this one was a bit more of a fun concept, and, you know, full-body flipper kind of things are not too common, and this one, looked pretty nice. The first version of Yugoslav Yeeter, which is what I consider this one, won the event that it was at in Maryland in June, and then it was at a second one, which was the one that Crippling National Debt ended up winning. This one was super fun and definitely had some of the best fights in my memory in competing. It had a few issues with durability of the frame because it was mostly all one part, but it managed to get one of the few tournament wins that we have gotten, and overall I'd say it's probably the plastic ant that I've had the best amount of success with. The most successful robot that we have had in our little team has been Crippling National Debt. This was the first version of that robot that got first place at Bayside First State Fights in Delaware in 2021, about a month after Yugoslav Eater ended up getting their victory. This one had some good wins and especially was quite the thorn in the side of Yugoslav Eater itself, where I believe it fought it several times. I think 3 is the correct amount. Overall, this bot has always had a good showing and eventually had some revisions as time went on. I have no memory of why I chose to make this, but I did. It's the Bee, but as a fairy weight. I remember the flipper having some kind of interesting issues with the actuation, which was kind of fun, I guess. Never competed because, of course, never competed at any fairy weight competitions, but I did end up making quite a few of them. It looks pretty cool. I'll give it that, but I mean it's the Bee. It's the Bee. The new version of Yugoslav Eater was a bit lower profile than the previous one and had a bit more replaceability with some of its parts so that it would not break things as often. This one, of course, did compete against Det a couple times, and also had a few tournament victories in my memory. I think it got 3rd place in 2 separate events from my memory. Unfortunately, it kind of ran into a wall when it fought the captain at a later event, and that was the end of it, but I have thought about bringing Eater at a few points. Hammer of God. This was probably the most interesting project I've worked on. This was a spring, actually not a spring, it was a rubber band powered hammer in which you would twist up a motor and then gears would spin and then the gears would lose contact and then fling the hammer forward. It got it got its butt kicked really badly in its fights, but it was a fun little project and Ricky Williams of Mammoth thought that it was pretty fun, so at least Ricky liked it, I guess. This was the robot that I ended up building for Antweight Anarchy. This was Mace of Spades, with the little kind of Deltarune style theme from my memory. This one was quite fun, and overall it had some pretty nice fights in Antweight Anarchy, although it did eventually crash out before it could make it super far in the tournament. The bigger wheels that were on it for that season definitely helped get some more thwacking action in with the rear mace. And overall this is just a pretty fun design, and the look of this eventually went into going with a newer Swiss Virginia down the road. Capital Crabs, this was one of the 2 robots in the very disastrous 2021 December event we competed at. Overall, I think the design of this was actually pretty solid, but the problem was that the spinner was just too thin at some parts, so whenever a decent hit came by, it just completely shattered the spinner, and as a result, it did quite poorly, going 0-2. The spinner was decently powerful then it worked, which was kind of the shame, because overall, I feel like this was a design that at least had some promise. It just kind of got its butt kicked. To go alongside Capital Crabs was Spain, but the A is silent, aka Spin. This robot I remember helping with this to get it all figured out and working in the parking lot before the event took place, and it died in just both of its fights because of some issues and the spinner just kind of breaking off and not being reliable, sadly. This was just a really terrible event. Both of these robots did not do very good. Congrats to Spain on winning the World Cup, though. This was the new version of Swiss Virginia, and this one I actually had a video for. As you can see, it uses the front kind of cool artwork that we had for Mace of Spades, and it also had a little lifting thing similar to what Mauricio V2 had, so it was a full lifting, full body lifter style design. This one did not compete at all though. I honestly don't remember exactly why, but overall I thought this was a pretty fun design. Filibuster V1 was our first ever Beetleweight, and this one we had a full kind of process showing off how we built it on this channel and its appearance in the fights. This one was super fun to work on. It took about 2 months to get this thing from building to completion, and it had some very fun fights in Norwalk, being the first fight in that July 2022 event. Overall, it did not have the greatest of success, but it definitely taught us a lot about making Beetleweights, and it paved the way for a bunch of future Beetleweights that we would eventually work on. Freeze Frame was a new continuation of that kind of Yugoslav Eater Swiss Virginia line, where it had a wedge with a spinner on it, a horizontal disc spinner, I guess kind of similar in size to Malice. This one managed to get all the way to the championship round in a macro event where unfortunately it lost, and then it was just 2 damage, and then eventually fell all the way to 3rd. But overall, this was a pretty fun one to work on, and overall, Freeze Frame was definitely one of the more fun robots I had, especially since it was my first plant spinner that wasn't terrible. The new version of Crippling National Debt was much larger. This one used a much bigger spinner and had a few issues getting into weight, but it did manage to get in some victories, and I believe this one also had never had a losing record in any of its fights. This one was quite fun, and overall, this was pretty solid debt. Did not have the success with winning an event as the first one, but it was a pretty decent follow-up. I know the buddy has mentioned maybe bringing back the first version of Debt though, but I don't know, we'll have to see. Capital Punishment was another robot that never had any fights, but I remember building this one alongside of some of my other ones. This one really just had some issues with drive that made it so it did not survive, but it did fix a lot of the key issues that plagued Capital Crabs, which was a lot more durable of a drum design so that it wouldn't split literally every time it made contact with something. And it's kind of a shame that this one never had any competing because I feel like it wasn't even that terrible of a design. I think I just ended up going a different direction and wanted to try some other stuff out. This one was one that actually was featured on the main channel in some drive testing, and this was Ocean Man, a 1-pound version of Ocean Man. It had some issues mainly with getting the pulleys working because I really had no idea what I was doing in terms of trying to get drive to work with a pulley system for the front and back wheels, so it didn't really last super long. Overall, I think it was pretty fun, and I did end up recycling this front spinner mount design for several robots, which you'll be seeing soon. Overall, it was a fun little project that didn't pan out. Speaking of that front spinner, it ends up going into making a new version of Mauricio, and I'm kind of surprised it ended up making 3 versions of Mauricio, but turns out I did. This one was, of course, the wheelchair design just scaled up to be with a plastic ant frame, and the spinner was made a little bit larger, and this one could gyro like crazy from my memory. This one did not have any competition, but once again, this spinner was kind of recycled, and really this whole design ended up being recycled into something new, which you'll see later. Filibuster V2 was aimed at fixing some of the key issues we had with the first one. I think it definitely looked a bit nicer. I think the red and blue spinners and forks definitely helped with the aesthetics a lot. Unfortunately, it kind of got destroyed in its second matchup against Skidmark at Norwalk in 2023. But overall, I think it definitely did look quite good, and overall it was a fun one to work on. We ended up going with a lot beefier armor on this one, and it definitely did help, but our choice of screws for the spinner kind of bit it in the back. This is what I mentioned as kind of a new version of Chaos, I guess. It was Vito, and it was basically just the Chaos shell, but without the lifter and a TPU front to act as a mini-bot for Filibuster at that 2023 event. Unfortunately, its drive got damaged in the first fight, which was unfortunate, and so it really did not end up helping the main bot at all, but it was a fun one to do some drive testing with the main one so that way we could prepare for the event a little bit at least. This was the true final stopping point for that design that started with Ocean Man and then went on to Mauricio. This was a 1-pound version of Filibuster that used that same spinner design, and this one did fight in one fight up at WPI, where unfortunately it kind of got destroyed by the event that won previously, or the robot that won the previous event up at WPI, but it was fun and it had at least a fun fight before it got kind of destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore, but it looked okay. This is definitely... This project was overall quite sad. This was Yeeter, which was a 3-pound beetle weight version of Yugoslav Yeeter made to try to be an effective front hinge flipper at Norwalk, and overall it really did not pan out. The drive was quite bad and the traction was bad, and overall it was just a big pile of meh. It did get one win over Event Horizon, which was definitely the best victory and only victory it had. It was fun, I guess. Lafayette V2 was a kind of continuation of some stuff that I had learned with making Hammer of God, using a spring or actuation with rubber bands for a powerful weapon. This one, I had seen some previous flippers competing at Macro, and this was kind of my take on it, kind of inspired by Blip, but with a bit more of my own twist on it. And this one was actually quite fun, and it ended up getting a couple victories before, unfortunately, it was just a bit too fragile for it to survive. Overall, though, it definitely looked pretty cool. This was the new version of Freeze Frame, which went from a Canadian theme to a Red Wings theme, with some nice art on the front and a little bit of a bigger spinner and a more durable base plate to hopefully prevent the spinner from breaking. The player was themed to was Dylan Larkin, who was number 71 on the Red Wings, but if I ever bring back Freeze Frame, it will not be having that theme, because now I hate Dylan Larkin because he wants to leave the Red Wings. This robot overall was okay. It had a couple wins. It wasn't great, wasn't bad. The third version of Crippling National Debt was a diagonal spinner. Diagonal spinners have kind of just been a funny meme idea we have had for a long time, and this was the best and only execution we've had of them properly in a robot. And it's pretty simple. It's just a motor mounted on its side to kind of be a vert, but it launches things slightly diagonally. Unfortunately, the spinner was a bit fragile on this one, but by switching to some spare freeze frame spinners, it had a decent amount of success in the one event that it has been at. Huge Thunderstorm Nightmare, which was based on a funny comment I got a long time ago on the channel, was a multi-bot project between me and 2 other people, being Chicken Strip Robotics and Penguin Robotics, where we would each make a 1/3 of the weight pound mini-bot and not tell what exactly we were making. So mine was a tiny version of Swiss Virginia. The baseball was made by Penguin, and then the little bee looking thing in the back was made by Chicken. And the baseball exploded as soon as it drove across the arena. Yoink was definitely the most successful Beetle weight in terms of competition up to this point, going 2-2 at the Norwalk event it was at, and having a very fun fight with Wyu, and overall it unfortunately just ran into a robot with really, really bad forks, and after that it just could not get past. The fun thing with this one is that in the fight against Wyu, where I chose to not go into Wyu, I ended up getting Norwalk probably several million views by not deciding to engage and letting it do its fun self-right thing. You're welcome, Norwalk. Send the paycheck in the mail. To go alongside Yoink for that event in 2025 was Critical Blunder, an overhead hammer saw with a chess theme. This one unfortunately just ran into problems getting it together. Time was a bit tight, and it did not pan out as it ran into Gulo Gulo in its first match, which kind of did a number on it, and it could not get working for its second match. The overall design of it, I think, was actually pretty nice. I helped a lot with the building of it, but unfortunately, it just did not work out, although maybe a new version will be on the horizon. This one did a full build process on the channel of it. This was Danger Noodle, which was a scaled up version, or scaled down version of Copperhead, using a model of it I made for the Battle RC replica pack. This one was a pretty fun one to work on, as I did have to cut out and make a bunch of really accurate parts for the top panel so that it all looked nice. It competed once in 2025, and it went 0-2 because unfortunately it was just not optimized to be effective as a 1-pound plastic ant, but it did look really cool and it was fun to use. The new version of Huge Thunderstorm Nightmare, I decided to make a tiny version of Danish Inquisition, and this one was paired with a robot from Chicken Strip Robotics who is a Commanders fan, and I was a Lions fan, so I was quite sad after a specific playoff game, so I put the Lions logo on it. This one was quite fun though, and this Huge Thunderstorm team actually managed to get a victory over a full-body multi-brain spinner. It didn't get a win after that though, but this one at least got a win, which is the only win this thing has ever gotten. Going through next, we have a bit of a new version of that previous Lafayette. This one was themed to Ursa Major, similar to the Hexbug that I had made previously. This one did unfortunately not get any wins, but the flipper overall was better than the previous one, getting a bit more in terms of effective flips and getting some good charges, but unfortunately this design really is just not optimized, and it needed a lot of low infill parts in order to work properly, which definitely bit it in the back a little bit. In the home stretch, we're now into some things I made this year. Oh, Hamburgers. This was the first of the Beetle weights I made this year. Unfortunately, it just ran into a ton of problems with the undercutter just not working reliably and being just a little bit poorly designed by my part. So this one did not stick around too long, but overall, I think it did look incredibly nice. And if I did a bit more testing and some fine-tuning, I think it's definitely a design that I can get working properly, but that's just something that unfortunately we will just have to wait and see on, as I have some other Beetle ideas that are being thought through. Freeze Frame V3, this one was basically made for a couple days and then ended up taking it apart. This was meant to be a continuation of the previous version with a new TPU wedge, which was allowed in the macro rule set, and a bit of an improvised new spinner, but unfortunately weight was a little bit high on it, and through testing it seemed like using the new wheels did not help a lot with traction, so I ended up pivoting to a new design, which you will see very soon in the last few bots. It was fun to try to bring this back, but unfortunately it just did not work out. Professor Chaos was the improvised design I made using that Oh Hamburgers design with the undercutter, and this one was just simply put either a double disc or a vertical spinner. It really would just depend how exactly I want to mount it for specific opponents. This one has not fought yet, but I do think overall it is about as good of a job I could have done in terms of taking a design for an undercutter and making it into a more conventional vert. Hopefully it'll be competing at competitions up at school sometime soon. We'll just have to wait and see how it does. Oh boy, it's Huge Thunderstorm Nightmare V3. I made the very long skinny one called Unlimited Power, which was a design originally made by Penguin that I thought would be fun to make my own spin on it for this team. It was about a foot long, so it was quite big, and unfortunately it did not get a win and it ended up getting split in half in its second fight. But it was a pretty fun project at least, and it got killed. But it's in Penguin's ownership now, and Bombshell was also on that team, which was pretty fun. the last robot in this whole thing. We have General Disarray, which was a smaller conventional vertical spinner design with wheels in the middle. This thing took a while to get used to driving, but once I did get the hang of it, it was very, very well with driving. And overall, it was a very fun bot to work on, and went 4-2 and finished 5th at the recent macro competition. Overall, this was a pretty fun one, and it's definitely the best bot I have made for Plastic Ants in terms of drive and weapon effectiveness, and I've got a new version of this on the horizon in the future.